Hello again, friends! And you are our friends, and welcome back to another edition of Jim Cornette's Drive Thru right here on this gloomy fall day. If the weather and the sky wasn't bad enough, I'm on the phone before. What do I look up and see the headline on CNBC? Tech stock carnage! I'm the great Brian Last, your host, and of course the man will be answering your questions and doing a review of AEW Rampage, and that's it! With some songs and some hijinks and some commercials and all the usual things that we have here. Lots of words and loud noises. Mr. Jim Cornette.
Loud noises. I love lamp, ladies and gentlemen. Brian Ladd, your tech stocks are plummeting.
Carnage.
Now, which falls faster, a tech stock or the brokering same? It is like a feather in a bowling ball. If they both leave the 32nd story window at the same time, which one hits the ground first? Luckily, you're only on the third floor. You just fuck your knees up.
Yeah. I'll be all right. I think I could do a third story jump and be all right. Depends where I land. Am I landing on the grass or am I landing on the cement? Where am I landing?
Story jump.
I think I wouldn't get too badly hurt.
Well, that's true. There's variables. It's a fluid situation. Are you going for the grassy knoll or are you going for the fucking asphalt? How hot is it? Is the asphalt hot? Might it be a little softer or it's frozen? Well, is the ground frozen? Are there icicles on the ground? Are there some types of obstacles and things that you might plummet toward? Awnings and things.
Yeah, I have not had the gardener come and do the season cleanup, so all the bushes in front are still big. I could land on those.
It's still big. What do you have the gardener that comes to do the fall cleanup? He fucking reduces your bushes to a goddamn potted plant for the
I'm
fall.
using bush as a word for the various crap that is in front of the window that I don't know what anything is, but I pay the fucking guy to come here and put it in and then clean it up, and then the fucking weeds pop up. I have to pay him again to come back and pick up the fucking weeds.
Well, don't get hot.
The fucking tech stock carnage.
The tech stock. But what about the cement truck? What about you've had hillbillies move in next door to you in your enclave there at Last Manor in New Jersey, and they're putting in a cement pond, and you're mad about that with the shoveling and the trucks and the concrete and the pouring and the grading. And they invited you over there to have dinner on their fancy eating table. They've even got those cool pot passers. You didn't go. No, not you. So now are you mad about the cement pond? Are you mad about the tech stocks plummeting? Are you mad about you still haven't got your chair put together, have you? Go ahead and admit it. Yeah, see, there you go. The squeaky chair will tell on you. Your squeaking heart will make you weep. You'll cry and cry. This is your show. You know what you ought to call this? You ought to call this the Wild Hair Edition of Jim Cornette's Drive Thru. Because we both got did your mother ever say that? Did Mama Last?
No, I never heard wild hair. Wild hair, I think, you're the first person I ever heard talk about a wild hair and like
you can't. You northern people.
Civilians?
My mother, Mama Cornette, whenever she would tell a story or relate an antidote, an amusing antidote, as they say, about somebody doing something stupid or frivolous or on the spur of the moment, she would say, well, they just got a wild hair up their ass and decided to go to the mountains. Or he just got a wild hair up his ass and decided to quit his job. It's always that wild hair that grows up your ass that makes you do strange, frivolous, or sperm of the moment type of things, according to Mama Cornette. What did Mama Last call something like that, some situation like that?
I have to be honest, I always had a very open relationship with my parents, could talk to them about anything. They trusted me. I never had a curfew. I never, caused any problems I couldn't get myself out of. I was always very smart and cunning.
God damn it. Oh, wait. Oh, God damn. I was with you until I was always very smart and cunning. And I must admit now, your status as a podcaster has been improved because you are such a cunning linguist.
Thank you very much.
But go ahead.
But I don't remember my parents ever using any sort of expressions or jokes about either genitalia or hair in the genitalia area. Maybe it's just me.
Wait a minute now. What kind of, your ass is not your genitalia area.
Your ass hair?
What kind of sex do you have anyway?
What would you classify ass hair as?
Ass hair would be hair in the crack of your ass.
Manscaped, a fine sponsor of this program.
That's right. Not today, but we'll mention them anyway.
Right. You use it for the various areas down there. I think it's all included in the general genital area.
Well, it's the front or the back. You know, milk, lemonade, round the back where fudge is made. But nevertheless,
we didn't say that either.
They never said. Well,
we never said that. No.
Still, the point is that if you use your Manscaped products, free plug, guys. Now, remember, for the folks out there keeping track, it's not a paid announcement.
Yeah, because we don't have enough this week.
we got way too few commercials this week. But anyway, the thing is, when you use your Manscaped product and you eliminate all that, it's the wild hair. It's the one that you miss. That's the one that sends you down the path of ruination. Sends you down the path of. Did you ever see the Drunkard? Did they ever put on the Drunkard as a school play when you were in school? In a tiny second grade, third grade, whatever, you'd go and see the play, and it would show the ruin.
No.
The ruin of a man who comes to a bad end because of the demon rum alcohol. It's the same. The wild hair up his ass is what caused him to start down that path to ruin.
I just want to make sure, because you never know with you and whatever you guys do over there. They didn't really have a school play called The Drunkard, did they?
That's a classic play from the turn of the century. The previous century, not this last one, but it was, look, Google it, motherfucker.
I'm not saying it's not a classic. Were they really doing it in schools?
I saw it once. I remember that plainly. Yes.
All right. We had Bye Bye Birdie.
I was too young to be in it. The Drunkard was played by one of the 12-year-olds.
We had Bye Bye Birdie. You had the Drunkard.
Bye Bye Birdie. Anyway, could this be the wild hair edition of the show? Because we just did the experience a couple of days ago. We're trying to keep on schedule now, keep up with the demand. I've been distracted due to the onslaught at JimCornette.com, which is still on the air, by the way. We'll talk about that in a minute. But so we're flying by the seat of our pants. Should we call it the wild hair edition? Possibly, maybe the surly edition, maybe even the disoriented edition of Corny's Drive-Thru. At least I didn't have to watch too much modern wrestling the past 48 hours. We're going to talk about Friday's Rampage, and that's the only Rampage we're going to go on the reviews today. So what should we call this show?
We call it Jim Cornette's Drive-Thru, episode 212.
Oh, God, Dad, just give it a number.
You want to give it a name? The Wild Hair Edition?
The Wild Hair Edition. If you just give it a number, then it's just a faceless show out there with a number.
Well, you may have a point.
I'm just a number. Didn't Bob Seger write a song about that? Just a number. Just a stranger. Stranger in this town. I feel like a number. I'm just a number. I'll tell you a number. The number so far is over 1,500. That's the individual merchandise orders that have been placed at the all-new JimCornette.com between Friday evening at 6 o'clock and Monday morning. And since this program will not be released until Tuesday evening, thereabouts, I will not give any sales pitches for any of the products because we are, if things continue at this rate, we are probably going to be suspending sales by the time you hear this. Because if you go to JimCornette.com when you hear this, and anything is still on sale, if it's something you want, you better get it, is all I'm going to say, because we're in that time frame. I could be a greedy prick. I know someone who shall remain nameless who counseled me to just take everybody's money. I could be a greedy prick and just stay open and not send people their stuff for 6 months, but I have too much goodwill and empathy for the Cult of Cornette members that have waited this long, so I'm hand signing everything, obviously. So we're cutting it off a little under 2,000 or so that I can do this in the next couple of months. And I will, but the website will still be up, and you can still go to the fine website, and you can email me. The contact form works. Of course, now I've gotten 200 emails over the weekend, so we're going to start muddling through some of those maybe on the experience, and you can link to or get links to the YouTube channel and the Patreon page and the podcasts and the entire listing of the podcasts. So they're all at your fingertips at jimcornette.com. But by the time you hear this, you may not be able to purchase any more merchandise because and Brian, you know, I go the extra mile. And now Hotchkiss has signed on for this. He's going to be assisting me in this. People say, why don't you get some help? Well, all 11 fingers of Hotchkiss is going to be on this too. But so I've gotten over 1,500 individual merchandise orders so far, as I mentioned. There have been at least 75, possibly more, emails after the fact from people. Jim, shit, fuck, I fucked up my address. Don't send it here, send it there. If you send it the first place that I said, it'll get lost. Or Jim, I fucked up the personalization. Can you say to Claude from your loving Uncle Og instead of to Joe, fuck you, or whatever? Or Jim, I've ordered the wrong shirt. Can you please change my shirt size? Thank you so much. Because we have the personal relationship. Me and the people. The cult of Cornette. We have the personal intercourse back and forth. Where we communicate back and forth with each other. And I try to help these people out when they've made a drastic error in their judgment and or their merchandise order. Possibly the error in judgment was making the merchandise order. We don't know about these things. But anyway, so first, when we cut the sales off so we can get a grip on this thing before it exceeds our capabilities, then we're going to go through all those emails, folks. So if you've got a dog in this fight, and so many of you do, we're going to go through those emails asking for changes. We're going to match those up with those individual orders out of the 2,000 that we will have received, and we're going to make those changes, and then we're going to get together all of the orders and start the process this weekend. Once that, because it's going to take us a day or two to muddle through that stuff. I'm going to start signing stuff this weekend and laying stuff out ready to be shipped, and the first packages will be on their way. Next Monday also is, what is that? Who's Columbus, the guy that found the wrong country accidentally. It's his day next Monday here in the States. So the middle of next week was when the packages will start heading out, and that will be continuing for probably at least the next 2 months. And thank you guys for the response. But it's your show.
It's my show, and one of the things we have to get out of the way is this review.
Oh, shit. I know what we got to get out of the way.
What's that?
Well, we don't need to get it out of the way. We need to celebrate it. We need to marinate in it. We need to let everybody know about it. Happy birthday, Bobby Fulton of the Fantastics. By the time you hear this, his birthday is past, because today is his birthday that we are recording. But for all of you out there, you can say happy birthday yesterday. Bobby Fulton of the Fantastic. He's 61 now. He's older than me again. I like it that way. I like to be the youngest guy in the room. That's why I don't go to many crowded rooms. But now it's your show.
Now it's my show, and I also do want to mention some really good news. Travis Heckel is on the mend, and we are very thankful to hear that, very happy to hear that.
He's on the downswing.
He's on the upswing. He's getting better.
So now we determined that if he's going downhill, even though that's easier than going uphill, that means it's bad health-wise. And uphill wasn't necessarily good health-wise, so we said upswing. That's what it is. But still swinging up requires more effort than swinging down. I think he should be on the downswing.
Rolling down a hill sounds like a lot of fun, unless you're rolling right into hell. So I think going up the hill to the top, yeah, it's a little more effort, but you can have a nice granola snack when you get to the zenith. Don't you agree?
What a granola snack? We don't even have a granola sponsor.
I was just speaking my personal preferences. I like to be honest with the audience, unlike you poser.
If I'm going to climb a fucking hill and I want a piece of fried chicken or a cheeseburger or a hot dog or something filling after doing all that work on top of the fucking hill, that's probably the reason I would have climbed the hill, is to get to the goddamn restaurant that was on top of it.
Well, apparently, from what the English language has destroyed in us, from what I understand and from what we've heard, Travis is right now on top of the mountain at home, and he's getting better. He's on the mend. We want to mention a few more of our guest artists. Everyone is just doing amazing work, and we are so grateful and so thankful, and so many of you we're actually looking forward to doing more stuff with in the future. But I want to make a few mentions of some people who have done great work. One is Jeff Brawn. You can check out his website, jeffbrawn.com. Let me spell that for you, because it's BRAWN. So jeffbrawn.com, Jeff.
And also, he did an amazing rendition of Don Knotts and the Ghost of Mr. Chicken, and he and his friend Mike sent me over the, I think I mentioned it on the show last week, the Ghost and Mr. Chicken spirit board that they had custom made. Is amazing. He's a great artist. He can capture the essence of Luther Haig.
You know what you should do? You should look into if you could buy from a warehouse sale the Ghost and Mr. Chicken DVDs. You talk about it more than any other human being on the planet. If anyone could sell them, it's you.
We kept that movie alive.
That's right. I never even heard about it until you started talking about it.
Well, you've led a sheltered life.
Oh, that's right. Well, another person who's lived again, the English language not helping me today. Another person who's lived a sheltered life, or maybe not, another great guest artist, Coyote Duran, and that is his real name. Coyote Duran, one of the coolest names.
Wait a minute, is that his Christian name that was given to him by his mother and father?
I didn't give him the Inquisition, but I believe it is his real name. He said it was his real name.
Was he, I feel like Kevin Sullivan now, was he the son of a jackal?
I can't comment on the family of Coyote Duran. I could just say Coyote, as we call him, as his friends call him.
Is he a wily young artist?
He is a fantastic artist. You can access his work at CoyoteDuranArt.com, for the record. Coyote Duran, Duran. And also Instagram.com/Coyote Duran. He did a great job with the stuff he's done so far. You'll be seeing more.
How else do you spell Duran, by the way?
Could be 2 R's, I think, if you're a dunce.
No, Duran had 2 R's, but it was 2 Durans.
I said if you were a dunce.
Dunce doesn't have any R's.
Well, you know who else doesn't have any R's? And that's a lie, because he does in his last name. But Scott Tierney, who also did a lot of great work. Check out his art at ScottTierneyCreative.com. Scott Tierney Creative, Tierney. Some great work. Everyone's been doing great work.
How else do you spell Tierney?
Someone may leave out the last E.
No. You remember Mick Tierney? He was a good guy in Memphis in the early developmental days. Excellent person there. Not a great worker, but he would have got there eventually, but he was a good guy.
What happened to him?
I don't have any idea. He went away with Brackus and Kulka and all those other guys.
Well, if it's Brackus, it may have gone to Deutschland, but we want to thank all of our guest artists. And
Mick
once
was
again,
Irish.
Okay.
Irish Mick Tierney.
Well, it's your show.
Well, it's your show, so.
I was giving it to you for the Rampage review.
Oh, what? Oh, all right. Well, then, in that case, on the Wild Hair Edition, ladies and gentlemen. Now, you're damned if you do, and this is another thing that Mama Cornette used to say. Well, you're damned if you do, and you're damned if you don't. Which means that you can't win either way, Brian, is what that basically means. That's motherly wisdom. Because somebody's always going to be displeased, right? Somebody's always going to be upset at what you say, no matter what it is. When I knock the modern wrestling and the modern wrestlers get their feelings hurt, some people like it and some people hate it. When I like the modern wrestling, well, then the same people that hate the modern wrestling get mad at me because I like the modern wrestling and vice versa. You see where I'm going with this? So I think it was generous, if nothing else, of Tony Khan to do a show this past Friday, October the 1st, on the Friday night edition of Rampage on AEW on TNT. It was nice of him to do a program where I could piss off everybody in the same review, because this thing, there were some things that I thought were some of the best things that have been done on the program. And then they ended up in the worst thing that's ever been done on the program. Basically, what I'm trying to say, Brian, is that everybody's going to be alternately pleased or displeased, as the case may be with this review, because depending on what you're looking at for pleasure, I'm going to give you a little something, and depending on what you're looking at to be pissed off, I'm going to give you a little something too. Either way. Have we got everybody covered, Brian?
I don't know if anyone's covered, but I think we're prepared.
Oh, God, I should have been covered for some of this. Anyway, it's Friday night. It's 10 o'clock. So they're going to lead with their marquee match, and we've talked about that's not a stupid thing to do. At that late, you're starting to fight sleep after that. And right out of the gate, there's Bryan Danielson. He's coming to the ring. The yes chants. The people are going crazy. He's over. They love the music. The Flight of the Bumblebee, as you so famously titled it. They love that stuff, right? And then, I'm not even going to make mention of the first voice you hear is excrement, sounding like he's voicing over a VHS tape in his basement. But still, it looks like they got a big crowd. Again, we're at a big-time show here. And then here comes the Hardley Boys and Brandon Cutlet. And again, I will even accept your point that you mentioned last week or whatever. Even if your cup of tea is not the Cucamonga Kids, it wouldn't be so offensive if it was just Matt and Nick Hardley without Brandon Cutlet. Because the face shield, why is he wearing the face shield? Originally, he had a broken nose or something. It's been 6 months ago. He's worn this longer than Andy Kaufman wore the neck brace, and Kaufman was over. But anyway, they come out. It just tells you these guys are not serious when they're bringing a goofy guy who never does anything other than goofy shit. Yes, you can have the goofy, annoying second or manager or stooge or whatever if he actually does shit at some point to get heat, or there's a reason, a purpose for his existence there in this world. But it's a clown show. So already I was thinking, okay, Bryan Danielson had a wonderful match with old Twinkle Toes, but does he have it in him to keep this guy serious and to avoid being an illogical gymnastics show? They've already got one of the stooges at ringside. The corpse referee is refereeing it. Can Bryan Danielson become the Merlin the Magician second time in a row? The answer was yes. He did it. With a couple of exceptions, which we will notate as we go through the details. Bryan Danielson got a serious pro wrestling match out of one of the Hardley Boys. Wait a minute, hold on here.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you. I mean, that's not for you.
Oh.
I mean, obviously, at this point, we know that a lot of these guys, when they get in the ring with the Punks and the Danielsons, at least then, even they, with their self-inflated opinions of themselves, know that they're in with someone that needs to be leading this thing, and they've talked it out ahead of time, or they worked it out, or whatever, to where things make sense, and they don't feel not only the need, but also feel the ability to just, let's put this cool thing that we thought of in where, fucking knock it off comes in with the computer laptop or whatever. So, and it's all about, if you've got a singer that's had no professional training, they might have a natural gift of their voice, but they could be all over the place and they don't know how to, the notes and how to carry the tune. And, they have natural talent that needs to be shaped. But if left to their own devices, they're all over the place. Same with almost any endeavor where you can have a natural innate talent for something, but until somebody explains to you how to apply it, you can be all over the page. Bryan Danielson made that goofy little backflip through the ropes and off the apron that Nick Jackson has been doing for 15 years actually make kind of sense for the first time, as opposed to being something he just did because it looked cute. There was still, obviously, Nick was doing his shit, but he didn't do as much of it, and when he did it, it made sense, and it was registered, and the people reacted, and they didn't bury the referee, they didn't fucking flaunt the rules, fight endlessly on the floor, do things that you wouldn't have done if it was a competition and you were trying to win. In most cases. I mean, I know the bar is way low these days, but still, he did it. When Danielson hit a dive early on at one point, while Jackson was distracted doing his goofy heel stuff and didn't see him coming, and then what'd he do? They didn't fight on the floor for 15 minutes. He grabbed the guy and threw him back in, because that's where he could actually beat him. Nick was selling for once in his life, not just going through the motions, but actually going down and selling. And Danielson was aggressive, but taking his time, because he didn't want to run off and leave the people, because they were already ready when the bell rang. The people wanted to see this match, so why run off and leave them when they're with it? Have you noticed that excrement will not shut up about anything that's ever happened in Japan and has to draw some comparison to Japan with anything going on in his own company?
When it's not that, he's usually talking about a match he had with someone 20 years ago.
Yeah, and if he can get, and it was in Japan at the same time, that's a double fucking whammy for him. And Danielson obviously was in control of most of this in the first segment, as he should have been, and he's the babyface. But his shit is different from most of the modern style guys in that he can work modern style, but he doesn't overlook the little shit that looks good, that makes the other shit mean something. When he controls the whole body, he works holds. He's not just sitting there waiting for the next run and jump spot. And then a classic babyface goes for a fucking trademark move and misses, and they start the heat. He moved, or Jackson moved on the drop kick in the corner. And so, boom, down he goes, and he starts getting heat on him. And then Matt interfered, right? And they go to the break with the babyface in jeopardy. And when they come back, he's got the heat going. And I guess at this point, you can tell old Nicky boy, Balding Buck, as we used to call him, his bumps and his spots and his running is there because that's, he trained on a trampoline. That's the flavor of stuff in wrestling that he can do. There's still the visual in that there's not only no muscular definition, but also he's 175 pounds. Somebody said, well, Bobby Eaton didn't have muscular definition. Well, he was also 225 most of the time, and if he hit you, if you didn't go down, you'd do a lot of funny things standing up. But overlooking the visual, Nick's bumps and his spots are there, but his punches, kicks, strikes are often meh. Did you pick up on that?
Well, they're not really known for their punches or strikes, but I've been saying for a long time that the Bucks are not my favorite, but if there was one Buck that I thought had something, it was him.
One Buck.
The other one is like fucking sober Jannetty. This guy actually can do some shit, and I've seen some people make the Shawn Michaels comparison, and I'm happy they are, because it's a lot more apropos than Bobby Eaton, and God. I think there is a comparison in terms of what they were to their time between Shawn Michaels and him, and for the record, we should point out correctly, everyone now reevaluates things the way I evaluated them at the time, that Bret Hart was much better. So I think it works.
Well, that's because it's like Bret Hart and Shawn Michaels, the debate, is sort of like the debate between Smoky Mountain Wrestling and ECW. At the time, people were enamored of the flashier object, but over time, people have said, that thing didn't age well, whereas the other one did. Anyway, when Bryan started to make his comeback, Danielson does the kicks to the chest when the guy's on his knees and people go yes and etc. And when Danielson does it, he puts the whole body in it and he has the drawback and boom. Well, he was letting Nick kick him. I hate the letting the other guy do something spot.
Well, you know what?
Go ahead.
I'm just going to say, because I want to remember to say this, I had the same reaction here and I've had it at least 2 or 3 times in the last couple episodes. It's happening too much. In the middle of the match or towards the end of the match, everything just stops and it's either they hit each other or like this. The one guy lets the other guy hit him over and over again. If it happens all the time, it means nothing. And it's happening all the fucking time. And again, in the middle of the match, all of a sudden it slows down to a pace. I hate it. It's the fucking worst.
Well, and let me fine tune what you might hate. Because the guys, especially the guys were hit me, now I'll hit you, hit me, now I'll hit you. That's bullshit. We've said that. And also, I mentioned Nick's kicks and strikes. If they had looked like Bryan's here, there would have been something to this. And basically, this was Bryan Danielson's version of hulking up here, where Lawler takes 3 or 4 shots to the fucking head and drops a strap, or Hogan in his shitty way turned away from the guy's punches and just shook his fist, or any other babyface bows up, right? However, this went too long. There was too many kicks. And the ones at the start especially were a little meh. I liked the way that Danielson reacted to this facially. And the way that you started seeing him, if it had been 4 kicks, and maybe on the 5th one he stood up and said, I've had all I can stand, I can't stand no more. But I didn't count, but there was a number of them. And they didn't look good. I would have bought this as Danielson's babyface Hulk up if it had. I think maybe he was waiting on a few that might register, because a few of them were just bleh, bleh. But anyway, you could have a little bit of everything here. The trading spot, I'm going to let you hit me. Now you're going to let me hit you. That's always bullshit. You can do a 1-2, 1-2 in the middle of the ring, make it look like a Rocky movie without asking the other guy to hit you. With this, he was on his knees. If Jackson had come in with bam, bam, and you could see him bow up after that, come on, motherfucker, and then the big one, 4 or 5, like I said, and then him come up and start his comeback, you would have had something. But they weren't impressive, and it went on too long to where you go, all right, what the fuck, right? And to be honest, at that point, it was like, if this guy can kick the other guy 6, 8 times in the chest and not hurt him, how's he been able to hold on this long? Anyway, however, having said that, Danielson bows up and spits in fucking old Nick's face and starts wailing on him and makes a comeback. And once the comeback got going, I mean, Danielson's precision is amazing, because he's like watching a champion billiards player where they're going to sink the ball because they're a pro, they should. But the really good ones position the cue ball for the next fucking move, right? Next fucking shot. In this case, just his precision, the way he lands, everything's safe, boom, boom, boom. And then he threw some real working kicks to the chest to show old Nick what they look like. And that registered. I mean, do you see the difference when Danielson does it? He moves his hands, he draws back, you can see him putting everything in it, and he lands firmly in safe places. It's not just like kids pretend kicking. Does that make any sense?
It does, and to go back to Shawn Michaels, I remember why I was never a big fan of his super kick, at least in the 90s, because I had seen Chris Adams do it. So I was like, this is a slow motion joke that looks like it's barely connecting. It got better as years went on.
He got more practice at it.
Yeah.
But anyway, so old Nicky boy, he goes, they're going back and forth, and he goes for a flipping splash off the top rope where Danielson's going to raise his knees. But Nick missed the knees anyway and came down on the tops of his feet. But Danielson saved it because apparently he was going to raise the knees, boom, and then go into the label lock, and that's what he did. He just went right into the label lock. And Jackson gets a rope break. Now, you're seeing one of the Hardley boys get a pop from the crowd for getting a rope break. They were like, oh. He's actually being forced to work and to have a wrestling match. They went out on the apron. Danielson's giving him the kicks. He drops down and Danielson kicks the fucking post, which is a good spot that they went back to later on when, that his leg was still damaged. I don't know why that Bryan Danielson decided to let anybody give him a German suplex on the apron after he's had concussion issues, but nevertheless, they did it all right. They're having a good match. As I said, I'm going to pick out a few things. Here's one of the other ones. Did you see when Danielson was on the floor and Nick's in the ring and he runs and jumps to the top and then does the flipping dive off the top while Danielson's getting up? He kind of hit him. It was acceptable the first time because he came from so far in the air and oh shit. But then they replayed it immediately in slow motion, and you could clearly see that he missed and that Bryan was attempting to grab him, right? So I don't know why they replayed that, because it was an impressive jump. It was just a phony landing. But then quickly, Nick throws Bryan back in the ring and goes for the sharpshooter on the injured leg. So the match made sense. A good spot where Danielson again was on the floor. Nick runs down the apron, goes to kick Danielson. Bryan moves and he kicked Cutlet right in the face, got rid of him. And then Danielson grabbed Nick in a German suplex on the floor, boom, and dropped him, and then threw him back in the ring and nailed his brother Pie Face. And they go back and forth. And Danielson gets the cattle mutilation, which I guess, and they were allegedly not allowed to call that cattle mutilation in the WWF. Is this what I heard?
That's what I heard.
So they were afraid PETA would be upset. Anyway, the tap out from the cattle mutilation, which was the perfect finish, not only because, yes, Bryan Danielson should have won this match, but also because it was, I mean, obviously, if you're not even a Hardley Boys hater, you would know that Nick Jackson should not defeat Bryan Danielson when Danielson's having a program with his stablemate, the champion, Old Twinkle Toes. So, perfect finish. The match made sense. It was good work. They didn't bury the referee. And old Rick Knox, he has no ability to take care of himself. He just stands and waves his arms. So it's up to the wrestlers, and they didn't bury him. And it was the best match that I've ever seen either one of the Hardley Boys have. So, I know that's going to make people upset that I've praised one of the little dwarfs, but I have to, or I'm not being honest. But whose fault was it that it was good? Bryan Danielson. Your thoughts?
I've always been a lot more lenient of Nick Jackson than you. But with that said, I don't know why. I just didn't like this match. It didn't connect with me. It didn't connect with me. It didn't.
Wait a minute, you're the one who said, I like the Bucks and Omega and Page. I
thought that match was better than this match. That match was better than this match, I think.
Oh, Christ.
I didn't really get into it. The one spot I did like was when he kicked Cutler in the face. I thought that was a fucking nice spot. But I was looking forward to this match, whatever reason. It could have been because of what time it airs. It could have been whatever. I couldn't get into the match. Nothing against either guy here. I couldn't get into it.
I was waiting to see when that Nick was going to do cartwheels and cheerleading gymnastics, or they were going to do something stupid, or they were going to bury the referee, or it wasn't going to make sense. And I didn't see any of that. So that's why because I think that is, I probably think back, is the first time I've ever seen one of the Hardy Boys involved in anything that didn't have any of that.
And at least with the facial hair, he just looks like some scuzzy dirtbag as opposed to a little kid. So he's got that going for him. And I go back.
He looks like a little dirtbag.
And I go back to what I was saying the last few weeks. If it was Omega and Cole and the Bucks and even Don Fallis, I could deal with that as long as I don't get too silly. As soon as you add Nakazawa and Cutlet, that's pure comedy. The Good Brothers, that's go-away heat comedy. That's even the worst kind of comedy in wrestling. So I think if it was just those five, I could deal with it because they'll do something interesting. It'll be better than Cody. But I don't know. I don't like all the comedy shit.
But we can't leave without mentioning the one thing that Danielson is not able to do with these people, apparently, is prevent the plethora and infestation of afterbirths. Because immediately when the match is over with, all the heels come out, all the baby faces come out, and they get in a really sloppy, phony fight because these guys have not ever... How can I say this? They've done a bunch of this shit on the indies, but they've never done these show-closing brawls or big schmazes in the ring in the territory days when it had to mean something, and you'd get your ass blistered if it didn't, or if your shit didn't look good or whatever. They think it's just to fill up the ring and have a lot of motion going on. If you watch any part of any of these big multi-man in-ring fights that AEW does, invariably, everybody just, two guys will lock up with each other, either down on the ground or standing up, and they'll just windmill punches at each other's shoulders, or same thing for weak kicks that go nowhere, or it's just motion, but none of the stuff individually looks worth a shit. Even when the guys can work, it's just all blah, blah, blah. And then when they get a spotlight, then their move might look okay. But basically, they got in a phony fight. And then Jungle Boy gets Adam Cole in the snare trap. And Danielson is daring Twinkle Toes to get back in the ring. And, of course, Twinkle Toes reacts in a phony comedic way. And runs into the ring, and Danielson gets him in the LeBell Lock. And both Twinkle Toes and Adam Cole tap at the same time to Jungle Boy and Danielson. I see where they were going, but it was too soon for Adam Cole to be put in that position. He hadn't been there 3 weeks.
I agree.
It was a cute spot. Oh, and they'll both tap. And see, Jungle Boy's deal was with Cole, whereas Danielson's deal is with Twinkle Toes. So when they both, yeah, that's cute. And if Cole had been there for 6 months, that'd also been cute. But he hadn't been there for 3 weeks, and he's tapping out to fucking Jungle Boy and in a secondary position to the champion tapping out to his number one contender. So you just had Adam Cole tap out, whether it counts or not, as a secondary piece of business to something else. The fuck?
And we've talked about Adam Page and how to slot him back in. If it was him instead of Luchasaurus there, it would work. Like, he'd be in this mix with these people, these exact people, actually.
There you go. But, and anything to get the dinosaur out of there. But anyway, yes, it was too soon for Cole. They could have enticed Olivier back into the ring in some other fashion than immobilizing and tapping out Adam Cole when he hadn't been in the company for 3 weeks, is all I'm saying. But that's still the first 20 minutes of the show, and my God, be thankful for small favors that the end there that didn't have more wrong with it, and one of the Hardy Boys had a good match, so I have to give it a thumbs up. I cannot lie or be dishonest.
How much is Tony Khan paying you, you shill?
Not as much as the Cult of Cornette are paying me. And I have to be honest to them. I have to be honest for my public, for the people.
You have to be honest, and we have to be honest about Nick Jackson's look. Like I said, he doesn't look like a teenage punk anymore. Looks more like a scuzzy dirtbag. And his hair even looks better. It makes me wonder if he's been using Keeps.
We know they all listen to the program. And whereas we called him Balding Buck, it looks like he may not have reversed that trend, but he's definitely slowed it down. And I think maybe that could be the secret. Maybe we'll find out. If you're in an AEW locker room, folks, look into Nick Hardley's bag and see if he has a big container of Keeps in there. And then we'll know, because, folks, if you want a simple, stress-free way to keep your hair, then you don't want to go out to a doctor's office. You don't want to leave your home. You want convenient virtual doctor consultations, medications delivered straight to your door. You want to go to Keeps.com, Keeps.com. Because as we've said so many times, they've got low-cost treatments starting at just $10 a month, generic versions of all the major hair loss products, discreet packaging, proven results. They've got more 5-star reviews than any of their competitors. And folks, if you're ready to take action and prevent hair loss, and we'll talk more about hair loss in a minute on the rest of this program, because they instigated hair loss. If you're not wanting to get your head shaved, but you're wanting to keep your hair, go to Keeps.com/JCE to get your first month of treatment for free. That's Keeps.com/JCE, your first month's treatment for free. Start right now. Treatment can take 4 to 6 months to see results, so act fast. By next summer, my God, you'll look like Pampiro Firpo.
That's right, Keeps.com. Keeps/JCE.
Don't slash me.
Well, let's slash the rest of this show. What was next on Rampage?
All righty. Well, apparently now Ricky Starks is rich. He's a millionaire. Did you see this?
I was going to say,
James Bond house.
I know Tony pays them well, but I had no idea how well he was paying them. Wow, good job, Ricky Starks. Who's your business manager? I'd like to know.
He had the big house, he had the big car, and he was talking about Brian Cage. And it was good. It was well shot.
Yeah, it was really good.
But I don't know how he got rich when everybody saw him, a year and a half ago, he's wrestling for the NWA.
You know what I did like? A small touch? Instead of just all of a sudden, here's some video, we don't understand how he got the money to film this, let alone to live this phony lifestyle. They had Hobbs and Hook introduce. Well, Hook stood there.
Yeah.
They had Hobbs and Hook introduce it. So then it makes a little bit of sense because you know it's coming from Team Taz.
Yes.
I like that.
That was a good point. You got a good point there, Brian, but if you comb your hair right, nobody will notice it. Anyway, so then they had a sit-down interview, brief, but a sit-down with CM Punk. So again, we've got another big name on the program. He put Hobbs over, as he should have. He wants the best competition in AEW. He said the perfect things that he would say if he's really in this position, and he said them realistically. He wants the competition. He wants to try himself. It wasn't a long deal, but it was, to get his face on the show. Very, very good piece there. And I mean, again, it's so simple. That's the same thing that I used to tell guys in any training program, seminar, wrestling school, whatever, or at any promotion, even in MLW a couple years ago. I watched guys do a promo, and let me ask you this. If this all was really happening and everything was legitimate, what would you say? And generally, those things were different than what they'd been saying. But his aren't. You can tell you, and the way that he talks, wrestling doesn't even have to be, in somebody's mind, either a work or legitimate, either one. It fits both. You know what I'm saying?
I do.
He skirts the things that the words that he shouldn't use and phrases it so you're not insulted either way. Speaking of being insulted either way, why did they do that? A three-way, no disqualification match between Jane Cargill, Nyla Rose, and poor, beleaguered Thunder Rosa. What did you think about this contest, Brian?
I thought, fuck this match. Thunder Rosa is so good and so talented. She looks like a wrestler. Quite frankly, if a mark hit the ring, she's choking the fucking mark out. She's tough. She could do a good promo. She has good matches. I hate her being used like this, and then I really hate the fucking finish. That's all I think about this.
Well,
she's so good. She's so fucking good. Why are they... forget it.
Between Jane Cargill's green body language and the ridiculously obvious choreography necessary to do a three-way match to begin with, this blew chunks from the start. And Rosa was trying. They went to the break almost immediately, but when they came back, there was a trash can in the ring, and Thunder Rosa's drop kicking it into Jane Cargill, and there was more three-way bullshit. And the first 20 minutes were so major league on this program, and now they follow it up with a girls' garbage match with the kendo sticks and the garbage can and the fucking table. And then I got as far as Thunder Rosa power bombing Nyla Rose off the apron through a table to the floor, and I said, fuck it, I'm done with this. So I don't know what else happened. I don't care. But again, if the girls are power bombing each other off aprons through tables and using chairs and kendo sticks and blah, 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 why do I give a fuck when the guys do it?
Jade went over.
Oh, good Lord. Who'd she beat?
I believe Thunder Rosa, but actually don't quote me on that because I started getting into the 30-second fast-forward groove.
Well, anyway, Malachi Black was in the spooky stairway. He means his promos, and he's very well-spoken. And, you know, we've said there's issues with some of the mind games in the matches, but still, they've certainly done a better job of introducing him than they did old Bluto a while back. And then we go from a guy who, you know, might be a major league talent to Matt Hardy and Jack Evans doing comedy about and our little dog Pockets about the main event on TV. And suddenly we're at bad cable access television. If you didn't know that Matt Hardy had been a star and a major name in the business, if you just came into this in a vacuum, you wouldn't be able to tell he's a name by the people he's associated with. Evans looks like what Evans looks like, and then there's the idiot on the other side of the split screen that didn't even realize, supposedly, that he was in a match for his hair. So, on the same program, you've got CM Punk and Bryan Danielson. You've got cable access wrestling. And it was a hair versus hair match. Brian, who won?
I didn't watch the match, for the record. I gave up on the show and I didn't see any of it. But I saw a picture of Jack Evans with part of his head shaved, so I assume he lost the match.
Well, basically I just wrote down a few comments. The only reason that I can think of to have this match is that they found out Jack Evans had lice or some other kind of parasite infestation that needs to be exterminated, so they decided to shave his head and do it on television. But guys, this is still national TV before 11 p.m. There's no reason to just waste 15 minutes of it. They started the show with a former WWE champion, and they finished it with guys who, before AEW went on the air, were job guys on outlaw shows. And they were doing phony wrestling and bad comedy. And this is the biggest problem they've got with growing their audience. Nobody who wants to watch a professional looking Major League Wrestling promotion on television would want to watch this clownishness in appealing or trying to appeal. And we've already seen their original audience. They love Danielson. They love Cole. They love fucking Punk. They love all these people. They're not going to run away if they don't see My Little Dog Pockets in the Hardy family office. But some other people that might not want to watch this program because they've tuned in and seen JoJo the dog-faced boy and all the amateur bullshit and the guys with Sharpie marks on their chests and miscellaneous masked people, to where those people might have thought, well, this is a fucking amateur hour. I ain't going to watch this. But now there's Punk, there's Danielson. Maybe it's changed. So they watch Punk and Danielson, they wow, it's changed. And then they see this, and they go, no, it hasn't changed. Nobody would have set the seats on fire in that building if My Little Dog Pockets and Jack Evans had not wrestled a hair versus hair match. But boy, FTR or Santana and Ortiz or any of their professional talent could have certainly had a 15-minute match and looked good and not run anybody off. So, and if they ever do a hair match again, they've already done one with job guys and goofs, and it wasn't serious. So it takes the edge off if they ever do it with top guys that matter. So they started in the penthouse and they finished firmly in the outhouse. That not even like Wednesday night's Dynamite where they bounce back again by the end. They ended on a low point.
You know, this may be a good time for our first question because it ties into this. Jim, this was sent to CornyDriveThru@gmail.com from Blake Williamson. Hello, Mr. Cornette and Mr. Last. This question is coming to you from the great city of Richmond, Kentucky. Watching AEW Rampage Friday night, my father drew the comparison between Matt Hardy and Paul Jones, and I couldn't help but laugh. My question to you, Mr. Cornette, is do you think Matt Hardy is the modern-day Paul Jones with his faction of low-card guys? And if so, who did it better? My father and I love the show and watch it every week. Keep up the great work.
Well, Paul Jones, honestly, as far as who did it better, whose results were better, Paul Jones's were. Because at least he did have some recognized talent at some various points in his stable. And honestly, the program with Jimmy Valiant against all of his men did draw money because it was Jimmy Valiant and he was so fucking over.
That is a good point you have to point out because you go back and you watch it and Paul Jones is a horrible manager and he has just the most ridiculous fucking stable and Jimmy Valiant looks like shit. However, Jimmy Valiant was super fucking over. So that's the reason it actually worked. Jimmy Valiant was, you could say almost like him and Orange Cassidy in different dimensions in terms of their role on the show. But Jimmy Valiant was actually over, really super over. Go watch Jimmy Valiant 83. It's ridiculous.
Yeah. And see, at that time, he'd been in the business 20 years. He was in his early to mid 40s. And I mean, he'd been a bodybuilder. Look at that handsome Jimmy Valiant and those fucking arms and that chest in the early 70s and etc. And he had gone through so many iterations of his gimmick. And he had lost weight when he had health issues and then he had bulked back up. But at that point, he'd realized it's the promo and it's the gimmick. And I mean, Jimmy Valiant used to take big bumps, big backdrops. They weren't all textbook perfect, but as a heel in the 60s and 70s, he did that. He didn't need to do any of that then, but he was over like crazy because the gimmick and the promos and the personality. So for people who wondered why we're comparing Paul Jones to Matt Hardy, Paul Jones was a big name in the Carolinas, in Georgia, in Florida, for 15 years as a wrestler. And he had been on top and held numerous championships. But at that time, he was in his, even mid to late 40s at that point. And he had a bad back. And he had transitioned to managing. And Paul Jones, his strength had never been his promos to begin with, but he was better as a wrestler and as a heel, especially himself. But when he tried to be a heel manager, it's a different art form. And he wasn't a good one at it. And he had a name because of his wrestling background, but as a manager, it was fucking rough. And so Dusty kept all of because Paul Jones and Jimmy Valiant was the feud, and Jimmy wasn't going to have any really good matches in ring at that point, so Jimmy wasn't going to be fucking wrestling the Horseman. But he was so over, Dusty concocted the thing with him and Paul Jones and just had Jimmy wrestle all of Paul Jones's guys, and that it was all contained in that match on the card, Jimmy Valiant versus Paul Jones's Army. And, you got what you got in the ring, but it drew money. Here's the problem. Matt Hardy, like Paul Jones, was a big name as a wrestler and has not transitioned well as a manager because it's a different art form. But they've given Matt Hardy nobody of any repute whatsoever to manage. And he ass-backwarded his way into it after Matt had also been, remember it, Matt came in teleporting as the broken Matt Hardy or the woken Matt Hardy. Then Matt Hardy got brain damage. Then Matt Hardy became himself 1 week. And then he became something else. And then he transitioned to be a manager that was stealing the guy's money from him. But then they signed up with him anyway. So he's been through about 5 or 6 different personalities. His guys are unproven and certainly not at the level of a guy like the Barbarian, who was a pretty fucking, a decent fucking name in the 80s. And instead of a guy that's super over that can draw money, he's being programmed in this case against the guy who's super over because he's the boss's favorite wrestler and he's like a little mascot. And people watch him on TV because they like to laugh at phony wrestling, but they're never going to buy a ticket to see this fucking guy in any major numbers. So I think Paul Jones did it better because the programs drew money and there were some recognized names involved. And Jimmy Valiant had been a major name in the wrestling business for 20 years at that point, even if he was not at the best of his physical peak at that time. Go ahead.
And hopefully they don't copy the Jones-Valiant feud in that it went on for like 5 years. Hopefully that's one thing they don't copy. But I do think it's a fair comparison. Matt Hardy is like the Paul Jones. His stable is the Jones Army. And then the best friends are like Jimmy Valiant, Lasertron, and Bugsy McGraw. Fucking show. But, this next question sent to CornyDriveThru@gmail.com from James in Morehead City, North Carolina. Who has had the biggest influence on the wrestling business historically? Eric Bischoff or Paul Heyman? Heyman obviously remains influential to this day, and ECW influenced an entire generation of wrestlers and fans, but Bischoff was the only one to ever truly take it to Vince on a national level and help bring the more athletic cruiserweight style fully into the mainstream of American wrestling. All things considered, which one has had the biggest impact on the business as we look back now in 2021?
Not saying whether that impact was positive or negative, Heyman.
Right, and that is a big point. You're not saying positive or negative, but who has really impacted the business the most?
Yes, and of course we say he's a genius performer. He's the most brilliant thespian involved in the business today. He's an amazing orator, great promos, always says the right thing, has a knack for putting together the big matches. But the impact or the influence that he had was a lot of what you just said. People wanting to emulate the ECW wrestlers. And unfortunately, as we talked about on the Experience this past weekend, unfortunately not picking a lot of the right ones to want to emulate. And we got a lot more Sandmans than we got, Eddie Guerrero's. And we got a lot more, the death match. That's what they took away. The people who really got into ECW and wanted to become wrestlers as a result of it, or, in some way get involved in the business, it seems like it's all the violence and the goofiness and the lack of rules and the chaos that they wanted to emulate. Bischoff had a tremendous impact at the time in terms of he was doing business at dwarfed ECWs, and he was the only one that ever got competitive with Vince neck to neck since Crockett in the 80s, and it was a whole different business then, and Vince wasn't as big. So, but that was at that time. Would it have happened? Did it happen when there was even somebody else in that chair? Because Bischoff over those 3 years was gone, a few times on company mandated breaks, shall we say. He's the one that did beat the opposition in the ratings for the 83 weeks that he likes to talk about. But at the same time, he's also the one that spent money like a drunken sailor and signed all those guys up to contracts that, even with Turner Home Entertainment paying the big stars and it not coming off the WCW books when their business tanked, it was a free fall. A wrestling promotion had never to that point, and it never has again, unless we get into looking at AEW's early books, gone $60 million in the hole in 12 months. Paul E's bankruptcy was not nearly that spectacular. Did Bischoff have a lasting impact on the business? Not really, because yes, that happened, but it would have happened with somebody else probably approximately the same way, somebody else in that chair, because it was Turner's money until they got tired of spending it. He briefly made him some. But everybody talks about the Cruiserweights, and we got to see the Cruiserweights in WCW. People don't remember with hindsight that at the time that was the same subset of wrestling fans, maybe larger numbers, but the same percentage of the overall audience. That's the AEW fans. They just wanted to see the work and the spots, and they didn't care what the guys looked like or whether they could talk or not. They just wanted to see the gymnastics in the ring. And, that today people remember, oh, yeah, they introduced the Cruiserweights. At the time, did the Cruiserweights, were they ever put in a position to draw any money in WCW, and did they ever? And the answer to both questions is no. And they were never featured. They were on television, and it was the same subset of fans that watch AEW for all the gymnastics now. It was the same kind of thing, that the people there, they didn't want silly, phony wrestling, but they liked the technical movement and all the dives and everything. But it wasn't an earth-shaking, fucking deal. And again, though, the wrestlers that watched WCW from that era, they all wanted to be luchadors instead of being the main event guys. And so they started flying, and that's why all the independent guys started flying. The garbage wrestlers got into garbage wrestling because everybody could be the drunk guy hitting you with a kendo stick. And all the 175-pound guys that practiced on their trampolines got into wrestling because they could do all those flips. But nobody, I won't say nobody, very few guys wanted to emulate the guys in the main events that were actually drawing all the money in either company. So Paul's legacy is longer lasting, in my opinion. Impact, legacy, whatever you want to call it, because that style of wrestling has lasted to this day, whereas Bischoff was only one of the people that was introducing. You saw Cruiserweights in WCW, but you could see that in other places as well and in other promotions, just not on national TV at the time. So I don't know. What do you think?
Well, let me ask you this. Let me ask you this. When you watch AEW, and we know Tony Khan was a big ECW fan, and Tony Khan paid a lot of attention to WCW Nitro, what do you see on AEW as the bigger influence? WCW or ECW?
Well, with the style, even WCW in the 90s didn't do just furniture garbage matches multiple times per show and fighting outside the ring and in the crowd for minutes at a time, did they? I've tried to put a lot of that stuff out of my mind.
There were a few brawls, but it wasn't like match after match. I tuned out after 1999, to be honest.
Yeah. I don't know. I think he's trying to do everything, and that's part of the problem. Everybody always says, it would be great to have a promotion where you have a buffet of styles, and if you don't like something here, then the next match. No. That just means if you go to see a movie and you see a combination comedy, drama, horror flick with musical interludes, you're going, what the fuck kind of drugs did I take before I came in here? Some things just don't go together. Peanut butter and chocolate's one thing. Peanut butter and fucking Eggs Benedict probably wouldn't work. So that I think he's doing a little bit of everything just because those are the things that he liked. But if you're going to write a song, is it going to be a ballad or a rock anthem or a fucking high tempo or whatever? You can't just, unless you're Meatloaf, you can't put 3 or 4 songs in the same song and make it come out right.
Do you see any Smoky Mountain Wrestling influence on AEW?
I don't know, because it would be hard to tell what a Smoky Mountain Wrestling influence was, because it would have to, Smoky Mountain Wrestling was professional wrestling. It was with different people doing different things and saying different things, but it was of the genre of pro wrestling within the parameters of what was accepted behavior in professional wrestling. So it resembled Mid-South, it resembled Mid-Atlantic, it resembled Old Memphis every once in a while, it resembled whatever the fuck, but there wasn't really one style, because we didn't want to reinvent the goddamn wheel. We wanted to do what everybody had done for so many years that nobody was doing anymore. So I don't know if you would obviously be able to say, well, I took X angle from a Smoky Mountain TV show I saw, or a finish or whatever, but not just a style, because it was wrestling.
Our next question, Jim, sent to CornyDriveThru@gmail.com from a parrot. Hi, Jim and Brian.
Hello!
I'm a parrot from Italy. I was a huge Coco Beware fan during his WWF run, and I started watching wrestling again during this recent human pandemic. Since I can't always watch WWE and AEW show with the volume up, I have a condition that forces me to repeat every word I hear. I want to ask you, who are the best and worst promo guys nowadays, and why? That chubby, featherless penguin seems to get huge reactions. Please answer. Typing really hurts my beak. Thank you, a parrot.
All righty then. Well, I think we've said Heyman is a step above. Punk is so good.
Well, let's start with WWE so you don't get thrown off. Who are the best people in WWE beyond Heyman? Do you consider Reigns a good promo or a great promo?
I haven't seen enough to say great. He doesn't go on, 4 or 5 minute tangents. He's not the guy that's going to go out there and just, be John Cena and just take over the room, or The Rock or whatever. But he delivers everything that he says realistically, and he doesn't say anything that it doesn't look like if he was who he was purported to be that he wouldn't say. So he's very good, but I don't know if I could say great when you're comparing bodies of work and just people's ability to Heyman or Punk or MJF. I don't know anybody else who else in the WWE. I mean, Cena's of that level. He's gone now. Rock, obviously. Austin. Who else in the WWE right now verbally stands up to any of the guys I just mentioned?
MVP is excellent on the mic, but again, stature too, you have to think about in terms of, well, I shouldn't even say that. If he's great on the mic, he's great on the mic.
Yeah.
MVP's great on the mic. I don't know if Edge is great on the mic or not. Seth Rollins isn't. I know that.
Oh, come on now. Don't beat up poor old Seth Stalin again. I'm just trying to think of another person in that company that I really look forward to hear talking.
Becky Lynch.
Becky Lynch. There you go. Becky Lynch, very good for reasons that we mentioned on the show here a week or two ago.
AEW has multiple people I like to hear talking.
Unfortunately, you don't hear from a lot of them very often, although that's starting to change now. MJF gets to speak more than he was there for a while when he was being inundated with sandbagged by Jerabloat. So with AEW, again, MJF is the usual suspect, and Punk has been tremendous. Bryan Danielson just has that. Danielson has that natural charisma, like Bruno, that even when you put him in a preposterous position, he comes off as like a real person and he's reacting legitimately. That's how he's gotten over and treaded so many waters, bad booking waters.
Taz
is good. And Britt Baker.
Yeah, Britt Baker.
She's doing a great job. So there are great talkers, and you don't have the scripted, the memorization, the blank staring eyes while a memorized communication is being recited in AEW nearly as bad as you have in the WWE, because WWE has a bunch more writers that'll get mad at you if you don't say every word exact. So those promos are almost all garbage. AEW, as a result of not having writers, it's sometimes feast and sometimes famine, depending on who's doing it. But at least it doesn't sound so phony. But a lot of times when the guys talk, it sounds phony because of the things they're saying or the preposterous shit they're in. But if you get the guys that, like, as we said, like Punk or like MJF or like some of these people that not only somehow seem to cull out the foolishness and stick to the straight business, but also mean what they say, that's a great combination.
Can Alex Marvez be the worst promo? Or because he's the interviewer, does he not count as the worst promo?
Oh, I forgot. They did mention the worst also, and boy, there's a buffet. Marvez can't be the worst promo because he's not doing a promo. He's doing a memorized line or two pitch to a promo. It's just that it's so obviously not real. He's either scared to death, he doesn't know how to put inflection in his voice. I don't know what the fucking thing is. But who is the worst promo? I mean, we asked the question a few weeks ago. Andrade.
Oof.
Andre Olio. If you speak Spanish, do you have a clue what he's saying, or is he mush-mouthed in both languages? And what was the answer we got? That it was better in Spanish, but it wasn't a fucking anything to write home about in either language? I mean, God.
Hey, what do you think of Cody after what we just saw? Do you think Cody's a good promo, or does that disqualify him, the fact that everything is rehearsed and workshopped?
No, but just the fact that he can get an entire sentence out without sounding like it's a hostage statement puts him ahead of half the WWE. As far as whether he wrote it, whether somebody else wrote it for him, whether he memorized it or read it off the side of a fucking bus, the delivery and just pronouncing the words right, still better than a lot of these guys. I hesitate to say who the worst is in the WWE because of the writer issue. You don't know what guys would sound like if they were actually doing wrestling promos as themselves instead of this horrible childish material and being expected to be actors. In AEW, again, they've got Mark Sterling managing poor old Jane Cargill. I don't believe anything he says because he's playing wrestling manager, but at least he can he can get the words out because he's a glib fellow. He probably is in sales in his real life in some way. Who do you think sucks worse?
Sucks the worst or the worst of the...
Sucks worst. Sucks worst. Who's the shittiest?
Seth Rollins drives me crazy. Matt Jackson really sucks. Matt Hardy. I'm not a Matt Hardy fan, so I'm not really a fan of his promos either. They're just very pro wrestling promo to me. And I don't mean that in a good way. I mean that like the same kind of shit when he submitted it as like the fan in WCW in 92 or whatever the fuck. Who else is really bad?
Then it's not pro wrestling like Vince uses as a derogatory term. It's more like people playing pro wrestler. And you don't want to hear that on your wrestling show.
All right. Well, there it is. The best and worst promos today. We answered nothing. We hope you appreciated that answer. Let's get another question.
It's a whole lot easier to say who are the best than it is to who's the worst, because then it just comes down to taste, because almost nobody's any good these days.
If you remember when FTR were on the show a long while back, right before they went to AEW, you brought up the fact, everyone talks about Jim Cornette and FTR because they think they need a mouthpiece. And if you remember, they jumped in and said, no, we can talk. We've never been given any chance at all to talk. And the last several weeks, since Cash got hurt and we finally got a fired up promo, they've been given time to talk and they've been impressive.
You think maybe Tony said, well, the fucking guy almost bled to death in my shitty ring, so maybe I ought to put him on TV a little more often?
I think he probably regrets the way they've been used somewhat, and he realizes they are the best in-ring team. They get great matches out of everyone they're working with, and it's nothing that insults anyone, and I think they may be used a little better, but we'll see.
Well, then here's a booking lesson now, because the curse of being a great worker, and a lot of the veterans would say this constantly. I've heard this numerous times. If you're a fantastic worker and everybody that you get in the ring with has their best match with you, unless you are figured in, the tendency will be to beat you because of that talent. So when you get someone who is capable of doing that, elevating everybody, the first thing you do is get them over and let them win and they have accomplishments. And then when they have a level of cachet with the audience, then you start in a hesitating fashion, not just doing it whole hog, but you start letting them do a job every now and then for someone else to elevate them as well. And if you trickle that out over a long enough period of time, you don't destroy all the goodwill that they had saved up with all of their victories. And at the same time, you get other people over. That's the balancing act, which again, a lot of people don't seem to get these days. And in AEW, we've seen an element of coming in on top and your trajectory points you straight to the middle rather than the other way around. So that's something that you need to do before you can let your talented worker make everybody else look like goddamn Bret Hart made Tom McGee look. You got to get that Bret Hart over first.
Well, speaking of booking advice, Jim, our next question sent to CornyDriveThru@gmail.com. Hi, Jim and Brian. My name is Tony Khan, and I have a question about booking wrestling.
Well, Tony, we'd be happy to answer your question.
Knowing that rematches are frowned upon by the average wrestling fan, and they need to be justified, of course, I wonder your ideas and experiences on how to justify rematches. You can't build a feud without having a few rematches. So how have you kept the product from being stale, where every feud plays out in a similar fashion? What makes a good, fresh feud, and what are some of your favorite feuds from the past?
Good Lord. Well, we could be here for 3 days, but
maybe leave out that last part.
Well, yeah, but also, we could be here for 3 days just unpacking and breaking down the psychological differences in the way that people used to watch wrestling, the way they do now, the way that people used to perpetrate wrestling, the way they do now. Wrestling, the single most bizarre statement that I've ever heard made probably is the phrase, wrestling fans frown on rematches. If there's probably one statement that could take into account whatever style of wrestling you like, or whether you want it to be the phony, kooky, wild, funny, or you want to be the Sarah whatever. No matter what style of wrestling you're into. The idea that fans frown on rematches is the most bizarre and completely opposite reaction to anything in the wrestling business from the previous 125 years that I've ever heard of. The wrestling business was built on rematches. The most profitable, the biggest gates, the biggest landmark historical matches, everything has been rematches. The original founding fathers of pro wrestling were smart enough to realize that, especially in those days, but actually especially now too, you'd have 1 million wrestlers, but you'd only have a handful that were at the top, that were box office draws, that were not only the best wrestlers for a shoot, which meant something back then, but also were the biggest draws. And as shooting ability has lessened in importance, the drawing ability still remains, and it's still, honestly, there's only a very few handful at the top that are major draws just when you put their name on the card. And in whatever period, I mean, Sam Muchnick even said that one time. He said, what, the only 3 draws were Buddy Rogers, Andre the Giant, and my God, who else did he say that when he would put on a card that with the Londas, their name would instantly jump the house regardless of what they were doing. Everybody else had to be in an issue, had to be going for a title, had to have a personal grudge, whatever the case. So the idea that fans frown on rematches is just indicative of that the last 15, 20 years, since everybody knows everything and they're all smart and they just want to see different car wrecks. They don't want to see the same car have the same wreck. They want to see a different car wreck. They've taken the fucking juice at the box office off of rematches and programs for 100 years. The biggest gate usually that guys would draw when they were in a rivalry in a program with each other was their last match, the blow-off match. And it could be in the monthly territories, in Madison Square Garden. Vince Sr. would bring a top heel in. He'd get 3 shots in the Garden. Disputed decision, Bruno or Pedro or whoever wins. That's the way that went. In the weekly territories, I've talked about this. Jerry Lawler and Bill Dundee did either 13 or 14 weeks in a row in Memphis in the summer of 77 and sold right at about 100,000 tickets in that less than 4-month period in the same building. Jerry Lawler and Jimmy Valiant went 13, 14 weeks. Programs in Florida, my God, or in Georgia went forever. How long did the Freebirds and the Von Erichs go in Dallas? Yes, there were 3 of each of them, but they had 6-mans, they had singles, they had tags, but it was still the Freebirds against the Von Erichs, rematch after rematch after rematch.
Through 88.
What the reason for that is because, again, from the very start of the wrestling business, they realized, well, we can make money on Gotch versus Hackenschmidt, but nobody else is as big as Gotch and Hackenschmidt. So Gotch versus Brian or Hackenschmidt versus Jim is not going to do the money that another Gotch and Hackenschmidt match would do if they have a disputed decision or there's some reason to bring it back. They didn't used to call it rematches in wrestling. They said, are you going to bring that back? Meaning if Jim's versus Brian on Tuesday night at the Gardens, is it just going to be a finish and you move on? Or are you going to bring it back? Are you going to rematch it the next week out of the disputed finish or decision? Are you going to bring it back again? Are you going to put some stipulations to it? Whatever. That's the way you build a program. So the whole concept of pro wrestling has been to get guys over, then put them in an issue, then have disputed decision in the first match, which leads to a rematch, if not multiple rematches, where you make more money out of it. And the gate and interest, as I said, for the last match in any series, if you'd done it right, was the big one. That was the cage match. That was the hair match. That was the loser leave town match. That was whatever that was going to be the ultimate decision maker between who was the best man in this particular goddamn conflict. And generally, the people would come back to see match after match after match if two things happened. One, the finishes to those matches that they saw hooked them to where they wanted to see next week, with the stipulation that would prevent that fluke from taking place. And secondly, and most importantly, if the guys had good matches, and not only good matches in the ring, but promos and interviews, and their whole demeanor in this thing sold that they were serious about it, that it was a legitimate, important thing to them, then the people would get behind it, and they would keep coming until the babyface won with no rebuttal. Babyface can win, but the heel gets heat afterwards. Babyface is still mad. Babyface could win by disqualification, but that's not any, that's frustrating. He didn't prove he was the better man. Until the babyface won cleanly, 1, 2, 3, or by submission over the heel, you could keep the program going and the people would support it. Now they just want to see goddamn so-and-so versus so-and-so, and then, okay, show me the next trick, because it's all meaningless. So that's what we've done as a business, as an industry. We have completely reversed the founding fathers of wrestling's inventions and innovations on how to draw money and made them meaningless. But no, I'm all fully in favor of rematches. And I can't imagine doing a wrestling promotion without rematches, because that's the basis of fucking wrestling.
Well, one of the reasons people have been talking about this is, if you think of AEW and a lot of the big feuds or a lot of the big matches, there were never rematches. How many times did Cody and MJF wrestle? Once, right?
I know. It's a complete waste to go to all that trouble to get one match and then fuck FTR and the Bucks.
Hey, even the
Cody
Bucks
and MJF.
Even the Omega and Page Bucks match that I liked. It was one match.
I'm not going to argue with that, but I see where you're going.
Yeah, just one time. I mean, it keeps happening over and over again. And
you know why the people remember? Still to this day, if you are of a certain age or have searched the internet on a significant basis, people say, name a great tag team rivalry. Midnight Express, Rock and Roll Express. Or not just to bring me into something, Dusty Rhodes and Ric Flair, Bobo Brazil and the Sheik, the Freebirds and the Von Erichs. You can go on and on and on with famous matchups, rivalries, however you want to call it, and they all wrestled hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of times. Not only at TV, but on house shows that existed, were a thing back then, night after night, on pay-per-views, on big show, whatever the case, over long periods, not constantly, not every week for fucking 5 years, but you could leave it and come back to it. Leave it and come back to it, because people still wanted to see it. That's how you establish those long-running rivalries and those memorable feuds and conflicts. You have multiple matches where multiple different things happen at the end to keep it fresh. That's the art of booking. The art of booking is not writing down matches. You can get a chimpanzee and put them at a typewriter. If you have an infinite amount of time, infinite amount of paper, sooner or later you get a Pulitzer Prize winner. But when you not only have to make the matches, but figure the finishes to interest people in seeing that match rematched, therein lies the art of booking. Nobody's doing that, because they've trained the people. Well, you just see this once because it's all phony anyway, and then we'll do something else later. As a matter of fact, and I'll say this and then I'll let you go. I'll let you move on. the people stopped hitting the ring because they were mad and started hitting the ring just because they want to be on television. About the time that people lost the ability to do these hot finishes that are meant and intended to stir people's emotions up, where they want to buy another ticket to see that rematch so that fucking guy that they like can get their hands on the motherfucker they don't like. That's where everybody was hitting the ring on those hot finishes, where the match was going to be brought back in a rematch. The people that hit the ring didn't want to wait for the rematch. They wanted to goddamn do something about it right then. That's the way you stir people's emotions up and get them to come back and see it a second time or a third time or whatever the case. What were you going to say?
I was going to say perhaps if Tony Khan listens to this and has a healthy breakfast in the morning, he'll start his day off right and fix some of these problems.
I got news for you. I don't think that's sugar that we saw on Tony's lips and nose, but nevertheless, folks, if you want to start the day off with a healthy breakfast that contains absolutely no cocaine or Adderall, then look no further than our friends at Magic Spoon. Magic Spoon, and folks, I'm not talking about taking drugs with your cereal. I'm talking about not taking carbs and sugar and junk with your cereal. And in this case, Magic Spoon has none of that. If you've been trying to cut down on the carbs, the sugar, and the unhealthy food, don't drink the protein shakes. Don't eat those granular fucking mud bars that's supposed to give you energy. Just eat healthy cereal like Magic Spoon. 0 grams of sugar, 13 to 14 grams of protein, only 4 net grams of carbs at each serving, only 140 calories a serving. Keto-friendly, gluten-free, grain-free, soy-free, low-carb, but not taste-free, ladies and gentlemen, whether it's cocoa, fruity, frosted, peanut butter, blueberry, cinnamon, cookies and cream, and maple waffle. If they come up with any other goddamn flavors, I'm going to need an oxygen tank. But regardless of what those flavors are, you can build your own box, your own custom bundle with just the ones you like. And if you go to magicspoon.com/Jim to grab the custom bundle of cereal, use the promo code Jim at checkout. You'll save $5 off your order. $5. That's enough to get you laid in the Philippines, folks. And Magic Spoon is so confident in their product, it's backed with a 100% happiness guarantee, which you will not find in any alleyway in the Philippines. They don't care whether you're happy afterwards or not, as long as you pay the $5. But the folks at Magic Spoon will refund your money, no questions asked. Not for any blowjobs, but definitely for the cereal. So anyway, remember, get your next delicious bowl of guilt-free cereal, but not oral sex, at magicspoon.com/Jim. And use the code Jim to save $5 off. $5. It goes a long way. Farther in the Philippines, but still, it's important here in America.
That's right. And what a fine sponsor and what a fine cereal Magic Spoon is. Everyone should be trying it right now. Try Frosted.
Just snack on it. Just eat keep it. I've found if you just keep some of this cereal in your pocket and just reach in every once in a while and just pop some in your mouth, it makes the day go by quicker. In your pocket, in your pants pocket. Don't sit on it, because then it's hard to pick out in your hand. You have to kind of snort it through a straw, which goes back to what I was saying earlier.
Jesus Christ.
But there's none of that on this cereal.
Well, let's get a couple history questions here on the show. This one was sent to CornyDriveThru@gmail.com from Richard Taylor.
Good old Dick Taylor. I remember him.
And boy, did it start pouring. Holy shit. But here's Richard's question.
Where is Dick these days that it's raining?
He put Dover in parentheses, but it was just right after his name. I don't know if that's his town or...
Would that be Delaware or the White Cliffs of?
It could be anywhere. But here's his question. Did Ted DiBiase really crush every bone in Bob Armstrong's face by purposely kicking his weight bench and then refuse to apologize? Why am I just hearing of this?
And that's the entire question.
The entire from Dover, yeah.
Well, I don't want to pop anybody's bubble, but it's been 40 years. But no, DiBiase was not responsible for that. But for the younger listeners, and this is an example again of guys in the wrestling business were met with an unfortunate situation and able to turn it into something that benefited business. In this case, in Georgia, DiBiase was a heel at the time. Wasn't that what he had the black glove also at this point in time? Did he not?
Yeah.
When he used the glove?
I believe so.
So the point is, Bob Armstrong was a huge babyface, and Bullet Bob, as we've said many times, was not only a workout fanatic, but lifted heavy because of the arms and the chest that he had till, almost till he passed away at age of 80. He was strong as a bull and he lifted heavy. And he's working out one day. He's top babyface of Georgia Territory. And he's working out and God, I've heard the story years ago from him, but I can't remember the details. But the point of the matter is that somehow the weights were not affixed to the bar. The collar came loose, whatever. Something happened. And the weight that he's benching, that heavy weight, and it fucking went sideways and he lost it. And the bar came down on his forehead basically and rolled across his face and crushed, if not all the bones, a lot of the bones in his face, his nose, his cheeks, almost killed him. And obviously he was out of action for a period of time. And when he came back, and we've mentioned this before, that's when the mask came up, the bullet came up, because when he came back, especially at first, he looked so different than he had before that it was, somewhat off-putting because he had some, reconstruction go on there. And that's why Brad Armstrong, till the day he passed away, he looked like Bullet did before the accident. He had a long, narrow nose, and he had, more angular features. Bob's face post-accident, and his nose was flatter and wider. And anyway, but when he was able to come back, Bob, to wrestling, they blamed DiBiase for the accident, that he somehow, what was he came in the gym who bend over from wherever he was from asked the question. Basically, they blamed DiBiase seeing Bob Armstrong vulnerable and kicking the bench and causing the weight to fall on him. And the fans then were basically told, well, he tried to kill Bob Armstrong. And so this motherfucker must pay. And they turned something that happened in real life into that people would hear about and know about in terms of an accident, Bob being out for some time, him looking differently, and they put heat on a heel so that he could come back and work with the guy, which is classic fucking wrestling. But after all these years, no, unfortunately, I can now debunk the rumor that DiBiase really did attempt to kill Bob Armstrong. But that's 40 years later, he's asking this question. Do you think 40 years from now, somebody's going to ask if MJF really did mean to kill Jericho when he pushed him off the fucking thing and he took the bump on the MyPillow?
No, but I think people will be asking, did Jericho mean to kill MJF's career?
Well, now that will still be a topic of conversation in 30 or 40 years.
I think so.
But anyway, no, that's any time that you were able to use an incident like that to get some heat on somebody to put it in the ring and sell tickets to it. That's why every time somebody was legitimately injured, the first thing that the booker, wherever they were working, was going to do was figure out, how can I tie this into something? Is it something we can use? And they would come up with things like that. And if you could convince the fans that this heel tried to kill legitimately, didn't care whether he died or not, was frivolous with his bodily health, tried to kill their favorite wrestler, they'd pay to see that guy get even. And that's again, and that was part of being a heel, and you welcomed shit like that. I mean, I bet a lot of these guys now, I don't want people to think that I tried to kill so-and-so. For real? What the fuck? In those days, you had heel, please, raising their hands. Let me be the guy that fucking tries to goddamn give Bruno Sammartino brain damage. I'll make that fucking money. They didn't care whether they hurt the fans' feelings about, oh, you tried to kill my favorite wrestler. Yeah, and if he dies, he dies. That's the whole fucking idea.
Okay, well, that is the whole idea there.
That's the whole idea.
Well, Jim, another question that was sent in. This was sent to CornyDriveThru@gmail.com from Zach. Ayo, Jim and Brian.
Ayo.
And by the way, the topic of this email is younger fan who is curious about Michael Hayes and the Freebirds.
Ayo.
One group, and particularly
Ayo.
one individual that has my wrestling interest surging recently, is learning about the Freebirds and Michael Purely Sexy Hayes. From the high points of how fitting coming out to Bad Street USA, well, it was fitting, they wrote the fucking song. The movements of Michael Hayes and his overall look and promo, and obviously the Von Erich rivalry, and then you have the not-so-high things like the apparent ego of Michael Hayes wanting to keep the Freebirds looking strong, which resulted in things like Dr. Death traumatizing Michael, Terry, and Jimmy from hearing the phrase, fuck with me. It's worded somewhat odd here. My question is, can you put into perspective the Freebirds to someone who didn't grow up in that territory era? And if I might also ask, what kind of reputation did Michael Hayes have? And do you have any particularly interesting stories about him?
Oh, God.
So, I think this is a great question, though, for a younger fan. Let's say someone born after 1990. Let's say someone born after 2000. You hear about the Freebirds. You see that Michael Hayes is a clown now. What did they really mean when they first popped up?
Well, fortunately, I'll be the Forrest Gump in this scenario. I was there at the start. Not at the start of their team, but the first time that they were advertised and billed as the Fabulous Freebirds, the first time they used the Freebird Skinnerd song to do their entrance, because they had, a lot of people know, Terry and Michael met in Mississippi when they both had gotten into the wrestling business as teenagers and were working for the, when the Curtis family, the Culkins, George and Gil Culkin, that wrestled as the Curtis family in Mississippi, were on the outs with Bill Watts and weren't part of Mid-South Wrestling. They ran their own territory. It was a small-time deal, but they would give guys breaks. And Michael was from the Pensacola area. He had grown up with Paul Bearer, Percy Pringle, and the Gibson brothers, and especially Robert Gibson, and an old-time guy named Mike Hendrick that didn't go very far. But anyway, Terry was from Chattanooga, which was more of the Goulas territory, and Terry had started working outlaw shows when he was 14. You see him against Ernie Ladd on those 1976 IWA tapings. I saw Terry the first time. He was 16 years old. He was 6'4", and 250 pounds. And he was same age as me. And I'm like, what the fuck? But anyway, they met and they teamed up. And finally, they both quit the Mississippi territory and got booked in Nashville for Nick Goulas. But Nick wouldn't use the Freebirds because Nick had never heard of Leonard Skinner. And this was 1978, by the way, or 79 by that point. He'd never heard of Leonard Skinner. He didn't want to play any rock and roll music. He's the one that asked if his booker, Tom Renesto, said, are them Freebirds, them boys taking them marijuana pills? So they were Terry Gordy and Pretty Boy Terry Gordy, and I think Michael Hayes at one point when he was like 18 was Lord Michael Hayes. And then was it whatever the fuck. Anyway, they got booked across on the other end of the state for Jerry Jarrett and to the Memphis territory, and finally got to become the Freebirds because Jarrett was a little younger and understood what was going on, and they'd already dabbled in using music. So they bring them in, and now they're the Fabulous Freebirds. They're wearing the robes. They're using the fucking Freebird song. And it kind of didn't fit because they're wearing silver robes and furry robes, but they're playing Skinnerd, who was, shit-kicking fucking Southern rock. And so finally they get to go to Louisiana, where they get a chance to go to Watts's military school for wrestling and start to understand things. And Terry's still only 19 years old. He's the best big man in the ring in the business. He's just a natural. And Michael could talk. Terry couldn't at the start. He got a pretty good promo later on, but Michael could always talk. One thing Michael couldn't do was work that well. And nobody really wanted to work with Michael because I can tell you, he punched me one time on top of the head in his comeback so hard that my teeth clacked together and my front tooth broke out at the gum line and I spit it out in my hand from one punch. Not even in my face. So Watts saw that Michael was a personality, and that's when he added Buddy Roberts to the team because Buddy Roberts was a veteran. He was a great worker. He could be the guy to drop the fall because you didn't want to beat the mouthpiece and you didn't want to beat the giant. And so Buddy became the utility guy, and Buddy also was able to ride in the car with these guys. Buddy drank and did everything that the Freebirds did, but he was 15 years older, so he was able to teach them about the wrestling business and survive on the road trips. And that's when they started being more, instead of being the long robes and pretty boy Michael Hayes or pretty boy Terry Gordy or, the long hair, whatever, they started getting more Skinner-dish. They started bringing out the fucking Confederate flag, the stars and bars. They started wearing the jeans and the fucking T-shirts and the Freebird shit, and then Bad Street USA. And they're not wearing silver lame fucking furry robes anymore. And that was really the Freebirds, and they drew money. They drew money in Mid-South, which is, it's not hard to do even when you're young and inexperienced because you had Watts booking you, and you had Watts teaching you and putting the shit together. But they drew record money. They ended up, the Freebirds were the biggest drawing tag team in the history of Mid-South Wrestling until the Midnight Express came, and they're still in the number 2 spot. And Michael's match with JYD, because they're the ones that got to blind the dog. So they drew incredible money and repeat money and repeat business in that territory. And JYD and Michael Hayes in the Superdome outdrew the Midnight Express in the Last Stampede. That was the only show that was ever bigger in the Superdome than the Last Stampede. And they had incredible heat. So when all of the promoters hear that there's these 20-year-old guys in Louisiana putting almost 30,000 people in the Superdome and doing this business, well, naturally, everybody's interested. And it was a no-brainer that the Freebirds could go from Louisiana to Georgia Championship Wrestling. And what was that, 1981 by that point?
80.
At the end of 80.
Yeah. Toward
the end of 80. Because now TBS is in a lot of homes, and Georgia Championship Wrestling on TBS is the biggest rated show on cable. And the Freebirds, because of Michael Hayes' promos and Gordy's just craziness and just the whole gimmick and the fact that they were always in an angle with somebody somewhere, whether it was Gordy giving DiBiase 4 pile drivers and him stretching him out of the studio, or them teasing the hair cream again, or, just Michael Hayes' promos on TBS with Gordon Soley.
That first one, the first time where the music hits.
Yeah.
And they're just standing there with Gordon. It was unlike anything you had ever seen on Georgia TV.
And that's the thing is, that's when I started driving 20-something miles to Weasel Dooley's house just to watch the TV show because the Freebirds were on it. This was the first, as MTV wasn't even on the air yet. Music videos were starting to be made and shown on other programs, but this was the first rock and roll tag team before the Rock and Roll Express. The fabulous Freebirds, but they were heels. They got over as heels, but they were cool, and they fit the fucking picture. Nobody had played the rock and roll music, but the rock and roll before. Nobody had played it on wrestling. There wasn't a 3-man team before. Nobody was doing promos like that. Gordy was exceptional. And then from Georgia, then they really could have had a bigger run like the Midnight Express did for 7 years straight, but they got screwy with their booking. And remember when they turned Hayes on Gordy and they were separate for a while and Gordy was teaming with Snuka and Hayes was a babyface.
Teaming with Kevin Von Erich.
Yeah, and then Hayes went to Continental for a while and
Southeastern still, but yeah.
It was Southeastern, but I'm not going to say anything. But back then when a guy of that left a spot like on Georgia TV to go to Southeastern in the Pensacola territory, Piper did that once. it was generally because there was a disciplinary situation or it was an easier territory to get away with doing the other things you wanted to do outside the ring.
Or they love cocaine.
Well, that kind of is what I just said, but I wasn't going to blatantly fucking... But anyway, but they were apart for a little while, and then it was a monumental angle that covered both. They were appearing in a number of different territories. They were back and forth between Dallas and Georgia, and Hayes between Georgia and Southeastern. Then they put the Birds back together and went to Dallas full time and had the run with the Freebirds, or had the run with the Von Erichs, which was just incredible. And again, you've got guys in their early 20s selling out Reunion Arena in Dallas, Texas, going to the fucking Texas Stadium, going to the Cotton Bowl, whatever. They got the chance to go to the WWF because Dave Wolf, Cyndi Lauper's manager / significant other, was a huge, not only wrestling fan, but because Michael Hayes really thought he was going to be a real rock star at that point, I think. I mean, his singing sounds like you're disemboweling a cat, but with the TV and the gimmick and the personality and the way wrestling was going, but they couldn't exist as people in the WWF, the Fabulous Freebirds. Not just Michael, but fucking Terry, not even Terry, just Buddy, any of them. As people, they could not. That would be like taking a rock and roll band and making them go to work in an office in a suit and tie at an insurance company. Within a couple weeks, something's going to fucking happen. And it didn't take a couple weeks. And then they left the WWF. And, but I just don't know how to, unless you were there concurrently at the time. They were an incredible tag team in the ring. They had the guy, and Gordy picked it up later, that could fucking talk and get the shit across. They were different. They were young. The people, the younger people, like every redneck in the South wanted to be Ronnie Van Zant. Including Michael Hayes. And then they tapped into, they were one of the first heel teams that, while they still had tremendous heat, and they're the ones that, when they'd go to Lake Charles, Louisiana, they'd have to go to the police station and have the police take them to the building because the fans were cutting their tires. So the fans started cutting the tires of the police car that brought the Freebirds to the Civic Center. And they would try to shoot the Drano and the water guns at them because the cops had them surrounded. They had tremendous heat, and with the Cajuns didn't like them, and the women didn't like them, and the fucking older people didn't like them, but the young white rednecks that wanted to be Ronnie Van Zant, they all wanted to be the fucking Freebirds. And you would go, then it started being a thing where, especially with the matches with the Von Erichs, you'd go in those buildings in Texas, and there would be on one side of the ring, there'd be Texas flags waving from the fans, and on the other side, they'd have the Confederate flag for the Freebirds. Because the girls loved the Von Erichs, and all of the girls who wanted to fuck the Von Erichs, their boyfriends were pissed at the Von Erichs, right? Do
you remember what Kevin said? This isn't a feud between Texas and Georgia. This is a feud between decency and filth.
Yes. And there you go. And that's the way a lot of people saw it. And some people were on the decency side and some people were on the filth side. And but you can't understate their impact. And whether there's the Freebirds 3-man rule, the Freebird rule is a 3-man team. They started doing it immediately, pretty much right afterwards. Dennis Condrey, Randy Rose, and Norvell Austin started doing it as the Midnight Express in Alabama. But the Freebirds were the first. And that was because of Watts's forethought and foresight to replace. Michael wasn't the manager, and Michael still wrestled in some of the matches. Michael definitely wrestled in the 6-mans, but Gordy and Roberts were the team that he wanted to use in the ring for the quality of the matches, and also because, as I said, you could beat Roberts and not take any heat off these guys.
And he took great bumps still at that time.
And yeah, he was tremendous at that point because he was only, I don't know if he was 40 yet at that point. He'd just been around forever.
Within a few years, he looked 50.
Well, that's because he was around fucking Michael and Terry on the road. I've told you. Bobby Eaton and Georgia rode with him sometimes. And one time that cop pulled him over, and it's Bobby Eaton and all three Freebirds, and they opened the fucking driver's door to talk to the cop because the window wouldn't roll down, and the fucking beer cans come spilling out of the floorboard, just dozens of them, and the entire inside panel of the driver's door just falls off into the fucking road, and the cop just looked and knew who they were and just said, y'all just get the fuck out of my county, right? Just go, just leave. But anyway, they were a huge team, and they were not only, for once, they were the darlings of the budding smart fan community. At that point, there weren't a lot of us, but we were there. They were the darlings of that community while still being big draws to the regular wrestling fans. And you know, and that's why I'm still amazed. Michael mellowed in his old age, and also, I mean, he's still been in trouble on various occasions, and they sent him to rehab. I guess they had him taking that medicine that makes you violently ill if you drink alcohol at one time as a condition of him staying employed up there. But just the fact that if you had asked anybody in the wrestling business, this is not due to talent, or not due to the ability to promo, or not due to wrestling mind, but just can Michael Hayes stay employed with Vince McMahon for 25 years? Why, people would have blown snot in your face laughing. And so that's, you know, what has shocked and amazed me, but it's just that he's only had the number of close calls he's had. But that was the point, is you could tell the Freebirds were almost, except for the fact about wanting to blind the junkyard dog or whatever, the Freebirds that you saw on television were the Freebirds that you got at the convenience store. That was the Freebirds. There was no exaggeration of personality. Michael Hayes wanted to be a rock star, Ronnie Van Zant. Terry Gordy was a wild-ass fucking country boy that didn't know his own strength and would kill you playing with you. And Buddy Roberts was the veteran that liked to party and do all kinds of shit and was the only one that could fucking withstand traveling with them. There was a story. One night they were in Reunion Arena in Dallas, sold out one of the Star Wars shows, 18,000 people. The Freebirds hit the ring in street clothes to jump the Von Erichs and get some heat on them. Buddy drops down to his ass in the middle of the ring to pull his, because they wore real cowboy boots. He's pulling his real cowboy boot off to fucking beat one of the Von Erichs over the head with it. An ounce of weed fell out of the boot in the middle of the fucking ring. And enough to where the people popped on it. The Freebirds, he lost his weed. And he grabbed it, stuck it in his pocket, and started hitting the fucking Von Erich over the head with the cowboy boot. They were real. You didn't have to make up a fucking gimmick. And they produced in the ring, primarily because of Terry and Buddy, and they produced on the microphone, primarily because of Michael. And there wasn't no bullshit about their gimmick. So that's why they got over and were remembered for so long.
I remember talking to you in the 90s when I was a teenager about what the Freebirds are like when they first started when you were a teenager. And I really wanted to see everything because I hadn't yet at that point. And I said, what do you have? Can you send me anything? And you said, I have everything, but I don't have time. And you hooked me up with Ken Cantrell. Because he was another Freebird nut from the early days, and he had everything off Georgia TV.
Yeah, I mean, it was amazing. It was like now, I guess, watching Heyman and Reigns on SmackDown, although not really as bad. Georgia TV was okay then, but you didn't get main event matches, but you had the stars, you had, the DiBiase's and all the guys that could work their ass off, but the Freebirds were the highlight of those programs.
You had main event personalities. And again, at that time when the Freebirds first got there, Freebirds versus what? Sullivan and Austin Idol? That's great stuff.
Yeah. And the 4 flat tire. I didn't say anything about 4 flat tires. I've redone that angle. I did it in OVW. I did it in Smoky Mountain. I think we might have done it in Ring of Honor. But the fucking big match was going to take place where the Freebirds were finally going to have to get in the ring with Austin Idol, and there's no Austin Idol. And he don't show up, and he don't show up. And finally, what did they do? Did they put somebody else in, or was it Kevin by himself? What did they do? Help me, savant.
Oh, it's been a while since I watched it. I want to say it was Kevin by himself, but now I'm not sure.
But nevertheless, suddenly Austin Idol bursts into the fucking, when the heels are about to kill the poor babyface. Austin Idol bursts in his street clothes with, I think he had the Halliburton suitcase, whatever. He said he gets in there, he makes a big comeback in the ring. And he says that, the reason he was there is he had to change. It takes a while to change a flat tire. Right? Well, then later on, was it later in the show? Was it the next week? Whatever.
I think it may have been later on.
It was later on. Yeah, it was later on in the program. The Freebirds are out there pissed, and he comes out because Michael Hayes said, well, what were you going to say first?
It's important to note he had just been one of the top heels there. So he had just turned babyface, so you kind of didn't trust him still. When he's not there, it could be the heel Austin Idol up to his old tricks.
Yes, did he leave Kevin twisting in the wind? Right? But whatever. But anyway, Hayes comes out and does the promo where he says, yeah, he comes in here with some kind of, didn't say bullshit, some cock and bull story about having 4 flat tires. Well, that's a bunch of garbage, blah, blah, blah. And then Idol immediately comes out, wait a minute, what did you just say? I said you made up a story. No. What else did you say? I never said anything about having 4 flat tires. And boom, how would Hayes know? He stooged himself. And here we go, and they have the big fight again. People were trading out on fucking videotape around the country. It was fucking great. So that's at the time, Georgia Championship Wrestling, as I mentioned, was not only the highest rated, not wrestling program, it was the highest rated program on cable in those days. Because primarily anytime that a city or an area got cable in the late 70s, early 80s, I'm not joking with everybody. There was other motivations to get cable, but every wrestling fan in the world got cable specifically to watch Georgia Championship Wrestling in those early days when it was hard to get and you had to wait. And that was a big fucking thing to do. So that show was good and you saw a lot of the stars, but the Freebirds stood out.
You have to imagine if back then in 1984, let's say, the fans had access to Raycon earbuds, they would have been listening to Bad Street USA everywhere they went.
No, they wouldn't have, because Bad Street hadn't been recorded yet. They would have been listening to the dulcet tones of Ronnie Van Zant singing Freebird while they...
It was recorded in 84.
Oh, in 84, okay. I thought you were going back in the Georgia Championship Wrestling days. Nevertheless, you can listen to Freebird, you can listen to Michael Hayes Disembowel Cats, you can listen to anything. You can listen to us. You can listen to anything you want to listen to on the Raycon earbuds, and there's new ones out. Have you heard about this? Have you read about this? The new everyday earbuds look, feel, and sound better than ever. They've got an improved rubber oil look. You know what a rubber oil look like is, don't you? It's the rubber oil look that looks like oil on rubber. It's very shiny, and it's nice, and it's smooth, and it feels good when you stick it in your ear. Or whatever you put oil on that's rubber, whatever you stick it in, any orifice. It feels better with the oil on it than if you go in dry. But folks, the optimized gel tips have a perfect in-ear fit for those of you who like oral sex. A-U-R-A-L. Do it in the ear, folks. Anyway, they got 3 new sound profiles to make sure that everything you're listening to sounds its best with just the right amount of bass. There's the pure mode for podcast listening, blues, instrumental. There's the balanced mode for podcasts and rock and heavy metal. There's the bass mode for hip-hop and EDM, whatever that may be. And Reggie, if you want to listen to Reggie music, put it on the bass mode. They've got these different switches, so it always sounds just right on the bass. And after you finish with the bass, then you can adjust the trout and the bluegill and even the crappie. Folks, there's also an all-new awareness mode for when you need to listen to your surroundings. You just hit the deal, and you can hear what's going on around you, which is good to keep you from being run over by bread trucks. There's a built-in microphone. You can take calls on your earbuds at just the press of a button. And you can hang up on people the same way, which is what I enjoy. Folks, Raycon start at half the price of the other premium audio brands, but they sound just as good. They come with a 45-day happiness guarantee. And right now, Drive-Thru listeners can get 15% off their Raycon order at buyraycon.com. That's BUYRAYCON, buyraycon.com/JCE. 15% off, not just one pair, everything you buy at buyraycon.com/JC, 15% off. Stick these things in your orifices and it'll be swell. You'll love it. And you don't have to lube these things either. They go right in. It's already got the rubber oil look.
We get the point with the rubber oil look. Buy Raycon.
That's what it says right here, improved rubber oil look.
All right, Jim, well, let's get a few more questions here this week on the show. This one was sent to CornyDriveThru@gmail.com from Jason Primo in Cornwall, Ontario, Canada.
Wait a minute, Jason, how do you spell that?
Primeau.
Primo.
What did I say?
You said Primo.
I apologize, Primo. In a recent interview, CM Punk has said that Bret Hart is truly the best there is, the best there was, and the best there ever will be. He went on to say that Shawn Michaels' stuff does not hold up. I have a quote here. I'll read it to you. This is allegedly from CM Punk. I think Bret Hart is legit the best there is, the best there was, and the best there ever will be. His stuff holds up. I was a Shawn Michaels fan when I was a kid because he did flashy stuff, you know? He was cocky. But some of his stuff doesn't hold up the way Bret's does. Bret is timeless. Bret's is timeless. You know, Bret is, you called it, the excellence of execution. He calls himself that. At the time, it was a cool nickname to me. But now I look back and I realize, man, everything he does is fundamentally sound. Like, he didn't misstep in the ring once. Like, everything he did, there was a reason for it. You watch his matches, you're like, oh, that's kind of what to build my stuff and model myself after. I don't know if that was worded wrong there at the end, but you get the general idea. What are your thoughts?
It's a transcription.
That's right. I don't know if this is necessarily a registered amanuensis, but this is certainly what is sent in by Jason.
What now?
An amanuensis.
Well, you do and you'll clean it up.
All right. Well, you brought up transcription. I brought up amanuensis.
No reason to bring your medical problems into this conversation.
All right.
And I see what he's talking about. We talked about it earlier in this program. Some things last longer than others that are the ECW was a product of the 90s with the grunge and the pop culture and the whole nine. It was tied very specifically to that time period and what was going on in music and pop culture and etc. And so therefore people went crazy for it at the time, but 20 years later, it doesn't hold up as well as we mentioned. And this is not me saying this. This is other people have said this. Whether everybody feels that way or not is different, but a lot of people saying it. Smoky Mountain Wrestling from the same time period as ECW stood up better as a wrestling program because it wasn't tied necessarily to any pop culture or any fad or wave or thing going on. It was pro wrestling with personal issues between people that wasn't necessarily, you know, we got a little topical with the gangstas and etc. But in hindsight, that type of program, much like we were just talking about the Freebirds on Georgia Championship Wrestling, those programs held up better than something that was tied to a fad or tied to the time, because it wasn't. And if you ain't in that time anymore, you don't, you know, you don't necessarily want to immerse yourself in it. So there are some things that in wrestling that are tied to a certain time period. And for the 90s, Michaels was, yes, he wasn't doing ridiculous gymnastics, just handsprings and cartwheels for the sake of it, but he was so athletic, he could apply the flying and the aerial shit and still apply it to his match. He had excellent matches, but if you go back and watch without being in that time, you can see that his shit didn't look as believable as Bret's, which is what we're talking about here. And it was a little more ballet-like and over-the-top athleticism. I've always mentioned the upside down. Ray Stevens did it brilliantly. It looked like he was off balance. It looked like he got hurt. It looked like he couldn't stop himself. Well, Flair took it, and it didn't look like Stevens's, but it still, until he got fancy with it and started going all the way over the top and running down the apron and jumping at whatever, it still looked good. Michaels looked like an acrobat taking the upside down in the turnbuckle. It was all at the same speed. It was fast, but it wasn't violent. And then he started where he would flip back down, land on his feet, and turn around and do something else, and jump down, turn around, pick a bale of cotton, whatever. He started adding shit to it, and it got more implausible. So that was one of those. Well, remember we did a watch along with Shawn Michaels and Vader from SummerSlam 96.
Yeah.
And everybody said what a great match that was. And I pointed out some things that would have made it a greater match if Michaels didn't have his own head up his own ass and wanted to work with Vader like he worked with everybody else. But you could that was a different match than a lot of Shawn Michaels' matches were at that point, because Vader was a different kind of opponent. So he had to dig in a little harder, but still it was prettier. It wasn't as violent. It wasn't as jarring. It wasn't as physical as Bret's style. Now that, to me, I'm not going to agree with CM Punk that Bret Hart was the greatest wrestler ever in the history of the world. But he was obviously.
But he may be the best in the last 30 years.
He might have been, even that, you've got to sit down and look at everybody. But he was definitely, for professional wrestling, and what it constitutes, he was better especially at the little things. He was better at the psychology. He was better at, he had his own patterns too. Bret faults Flair for always taking the same bumps. Bret had his pattern too, but he had more different kinds of matches maybe than Michaels did, who still went back and did a lot of his own stuff too. And you had Michaels' match, whereas Bret would have other guys' matches. So I can see, yes, I agree with Punk that Bret's stuff does stand up better. And for all the reasons I just mentioned, I still don't know, can you say Bret was the best of the last 30 years? Because that takes into account some of Flair's prime also.
Well, not really.
30? 91. Yeah, well, they're...
Not that he didn't have a couple good years and some great matches, but that's kind of the end of Flair on that list.
Yeah, well, then he's closer. Then Bret may be closer up the top.
Jim, CM Punk also did a recent interview where the topic of Hulk Hogan came up. I guess they were asking CM Punk how he compares to some of the big stars, the biggest stars of the past, like Steve Austin and Hogan. And here's his response. I'd like to get your reaction, because a lot of people have asked about it. Throwing my name in the hat with someone like Steve Austin, who is arguably the biggest star the business has ever seen, a lot of this is subjective. You can make the argument that Hulk Hogan is a bigger star than Steve Austin. Then you look at the business periods and eras and box office receipts and all that other stuff. I think Hogan is a piece of shit. So obviously I'm like, Steve Austin, yeah. What it feels like, I don't have the words to describe. I know what I feel like. I want to help everyone on the AEW roster fucking get there. But a lot of people honed in on the Hulk Hogan as a piece of shit and wanted to know your thoughts.
Well, it sounds like from the statement there, and I don't want to put words in Punk's mouth, but it sounds like from the statement there that the context he's making is that Hulk Hogan was a noted piece of shit in terms of keeping his spot, making sure that everybody else was below him, maneuvering side. What are you laughing at?
I think it may be more than, I think it may be just, maybe more than the backstage politics of Hulk Hogan.
Well, no, I'm talking about making sure that he was the center of the universe and that everything revolved around him and that fuck everybody else, I'm going to get mine first and etc. Whereas Punk is saying he's there to help the other folks in the locker room. I don't know if he and Hulk Hogan, Punk, that is, have had any personal conversation back and forth, and he just decided, well, he's a piece of shit personally too. That may be possible. But I'm not surprised that he would characterize the Hulkster in that fashion, brother.
Yeah, Hulk Hogan then announced that he turned down a chance to wrestle CM Punk, and CM Punk said, what is he talking about? Well, let's get another question here, Jim. This one was sent to CornyDriveThru. Excuse me, no, it wasn't. This one was sent on Twitter using the hashtag CornyDriveThru from Rory Melberg. He sent an article from...
Oh, now you're just making all these... You're the one making up all these weird names on NXT.
I have not made up a single name. Rory Melberg on Twitter. 10 things you should know about AEW's Excalibur, an article from The Sportster. Are you interested in learning about Excalibur?
Not at all, but if it'll help this program along, I'll suffer under it.
So here are 10 things that you should know about AEW's Excalibur, Jim. Number 10, he worked for New Japan.
Oh, my golly. I should know that because that's all he fucking talks about.
But actually, I don't know if it was as a wrestler. During his career, he has been able to work with New Japan, adding to their broadcasting team.
Oh.
Before AEW was created. This only enhanced his commentary work and now provided him with a greater knowledge.
Oh, my.
Number 9, did you know that Excalibur co-founded Pro Wrestling Guerrilla?
I did know that, along with several other of the boys who figured, well, we can't get anybody else to book us, so we'll just run our own company and put ourselves on top.
Joey Ryan, one of the co-founders of Pro Wrestling Guerrilla.
In a barn in Reseda somewhere.
Did you know that Excalibur is a former wrestler?
Yes, he brings that up every once in a while, doesn't he? Just a time or two. He's a former wrestler who wrestled for the company that he co-founded and helped pay for.
Even though he is actually best known for his work behind the scenes and the commentary desk, Excalibur did spend time in the ring himself. He was able to have a solid career and at least learn the fundamentals in order to help establish his knowledge.
What the fuck? I've seen people been in wrestling school for 3 months that know the fundamentals better than... No, he worked for himself and his friends in their vanity play wrestling promotion. That is his career in wrestling.
But another thing you should know about him, who's his trainer?
I didn't know he had one. I'm figuring that his trainer is probably in the Federal Witness Protection Program.
Well, he may be, because his trainer is Super Dragon. Of course, the two men became good friends over the years.
Who?
The Super Dragon.
The Super Dragon.
Or just Super Dragon, actually, I think. Not the Super Dragon. He is just Super Dragon.
He's not even the only one.
The two men.
He's not the Super Dragon. He's just a Super Dragon.
Apparently, they became Pro Wrestling Guerrilla Tag Team Champions together.
No, you're kidding.
At one point.
They won the belts in the company they started?
That's right. Another thing you should know is, why did Excalibur become a commentator? Jim, do you have any theory on why?
That's what I've been asking for so long now. Why?
While his in-ring career could have gone for longer than it did, Excalibur admitted the reason he called time...
That's what she said.
The reason he called time on wrestling was because of an accumulation of injuries and not getting to the level he wanted. However, because he was so passionate about the business, he wanted to stay involved. This is where commentary ended up being his next pursuit, which is something that ended up working out perfectly for him. Jim?
So basically... the summation of that is he was ill-equipped athletically to do this, and he got hurt, and he didn't get anywhere with it, and he figured he was going to kill himself, but he's still a mark, so he's going to do commentary over the play matches that his friends have instead of actually participating in them.
Another thing you should know about him, he was a tape trader. This is how he was able to learn about the world of wrestling. It took place via tape trading.
Apparently, he didn't study those tapes closely, because I was a tape trader too. And that's how you got to watch footage in those days before the YouTubes and things and such of that nature. But apparently, he didn't study too closely to his material.
Did you know that Excalibur was beaten by Kevin Steen's son?
What?
Wrestlers always share a close bond.
Steen's kid's like fucking 10 years old, isn't he?
I'm not sure the age. I really don't know anything about Kevin Steen's family, but wrestlers always share a close bond, and when someone begins to have a family, that is something that certainly strengthens that bond. During Excalibur's time working in DDT, he had a feud with Kevin Steen, one of the top stars. He cut a promo against Steen's son during that time, and it actually led to their storyline intensifying. Steen ended up hitting a trio of package pile drivers onto Excalibur, which then led to him putting his young son on top of him for the pinfall.
Oh, good Lord. I'm sure they did. I have no doubt whatsoever that recount of those activities is completely accurate. That sounds like something everybody involved would do.
Another thing you should know about him, there's only 3 left.
Jesus Christ.
He's also been a solo commentator in Pro Wrestling Guerrilla without a commentating team with him.
Well, good for him.
Number 2.
Probably was the budget, but nevertheless.
You should know that he got advice from Jim Ross. When Excalibur joined... When Excalibur joined AEW...
Noises!
He was immediately given the chance to work with Jim Ross, who is one of the most legendary commentators of all time. Being together is something that has improved Excalibur's game, and that is down to the advice he received from JR. JR told Excalibur to slow down, telling him they are not paid by the hour, which is something he has taken on board throughout his time with the company. Slow down, you're not paid by the hour. Even if you went fast or slow, it doesn't matter if you're paid by the hour. What does that mean?
Say it by the word, I think is what he was trying to say there. But do you think that the first thing that JR said to him when he looked over at him wearing that fucking mask and a suit at the announce desk was, what's the deal with the fucking mask?
I actually believe him. I think the first thing Jim Ross says to anyone under the age of 50 is slow down.
Well, that's true, and he needed to. But I've got to think at some point, everybody has to look at him and just, if they're being obvious or being honest, has to go, what's the deal with the fucking mask, dude? Seriously. Nobody knows that you did all these things in this 10 things that we need to know about you, and nobody gives a shit.
Well, the final thing on this list, why does Excalibur wear the mask?
Oh!
One of the most confusing things that fans have wondered about him is why Excalibur wears a mask. It is certainly not unusual in the wrestling world, but it is for commentators. However, the reason behind it is that he's always worn one throughout his career. After he was influenced by certain masked wrestlers...
Wait a minute. It's like they're saying, well, he's been all over the world. He's Mil Mascaras. He's Rey Mysterio. He's the Destroyer. He's been all over the world. Millions and millions of people have seen him where he's always done this. No, he did it in his own little vanity project company in a barn in a suburb of Los Angeles for a brief period of time 15 years ago to absolutely no popular acclaim. And because he is convinced that he was a real wrestler, Pinocchio, he is foisting that mask off on the national television viewing audience. That's why. Is that what the rest of that thing says?
After he was influenced by certain masked wrestlers, and they don't name these certain wrestlers, he decided to wear one himself. That's something he has just opted to never change, as he believes that he can separate his wrestling world and non-wrestling world by whether or not he is wearing the mask.
Is this a foreign language website?
You know what? I don't think so. I don't think so. No, this is from an English-speaking country, apparently.
Well, there you have it. Everything we didn't want to know about excrement.
Well, when it comes to excrement, you may want to get in your car and drive away, but what if you have a problem? What if you have a part that's missing or a part that you can't find a good place to get it? Jim, we need to be able to help out the listeners with all these crazy problems.
Oh, goddamn. I need to be able to help you out with your transitions when you're moving to a sponsor spot. Well, speaking of excrement, look no further than our next sponsor.
Oh, give me a break.
All the shit you might ever want to have, bro. I'll tell you what. You know, there's a lot of shit around these days when it comes to cars. There's all kinds of, it used to be, you got a Ford, you got a Chevy, you got a Buick. Now it's Fiats and Kias and models all over the places, and XLs and ELs and XXLs and fat people's cars, whatever the case. You've got 20 million models. You have to be a brain surgeon to be able to work on anything anymore. You know, I never was a person that worked on cars because I don't trust myself, because that's not my area of expertise. I can put gas in them. That's about it. But you know, these big-time car repair places, the dealerships and the car repair place, they can smell somebody coming in that don't know what they're talking about. For example, one time I went in, it took me 45 minutes to get blinker fluid. For heaven's sake, nobody was willing to help me at all. Have you ever gone on a search for blinker fluid?
No.
Well, it's tough to find, but I'll tell you what. They want to charge you out the ass, but at rockauto.com, everybody gets low prices. The professional mechanics and the jack-off the street, just like all of you folks. I'm talking to you out there. If you identify as a jack-off the street, rockauto.com is the place you need to go for parts for your car, because they've got everything from engine control modules and brake parts to tail lamps and motor oil, even new carpet. They've got crankshafts. And if you don't have a crank, they've got a crank for your shaft. The rockauto.com catalog is unique, and it's easy to navigate. It's almost as good like Hotchkiss Featherbottom built this site for them. You can see all the parts available for your vehicle, choose the brands, the specifications, the prices you prefer, because they've got the same low prices for professionals and the do-it-yourselfers. So if you want to risk your life and limb by repairing your car on your own, just let me know about it so I can stay off the highway when you immolate into flames. But nevertheless, why spend up to twice as much for the same parts and get some shade tree mechanic to do it for you when you can fuck it up just as well as anybody else? So do it yourself. Go to rockauto.com right now, and you can see all the parts available for your car or truck, and you can save money that you can use for other important things like mortgage, food, hospital bills from the wreck that you'll have when you fuck up your own repairs, but the parts will be perfect. Why would you choose to spend 30%, 50%, 100% more for the exact same auto part at a chain store or new car dealership when you can go to rockauto.com and save money? Or even better yet, most of you people out there save lives. Don't drive at all. But if you're going to drive, fix your car with parts from Rock Auto. Amazing selection, reliably low prices. And when you go to rockauto.com and you buy these parts to fix your car, there's a little box on there that says, "How did you hear about us?" Type JCE in that box so that they know that we sent you. They're not going to give you a penny off, but not because they're cheap bastards and assholes about the whole thing, but because they're already so cheap with all of their prices to every mark that walks in the door that fuck, the next step is for them to pay you to take this shit off their hands. So it can't get any cheaper. You can't get a discount on practically nothing, for heaven's sake. Go to rockauto.com, type JCE in the box on how did you hear about us, but that won't help you because you're already going to get a great price because this shit is cheap. Not in quality, but in price. RockAuto.com, by the way, also is for everybody, and you don't have to have a membership or account login. All those mysterious things that a lot of websites want you to do, you don't have to have any of that. No membership, no account login. Money, you got to have that shit, or they're going to drop you like a bad habit. But anyway, RockAuto.com, amazing selection, reliably low prices, all the parts your car will ever need. RockAuto.com.
.com. Don't forget the .com. That's right.
Don't forget the .com.
And don't forget to let them know you heard about it here on JCE, or the Drive Thru as we call it here on this day of the week.
Yes, but you got to type that in the "How did you hear about us" box so they know that you're somebody.
Let's get a few more questions before we wrap things up. Jim, this one was sent to CornyDriveThru@gmail.com from Jeremy. I just read quotes from an interview with everyone's favorite segregation-ending thespian and his wife, where they were asked for their Mount Rushmores of wrestling, and I'm dying to hear your thoughts. Cody responded, Vince McMahon, Dusty Rhodes, The Rock, and Tony Khan. Showing her vast knowledge, Brandi went with Sherry Martel, Mae Young, Medusa, and Miss Elizabeth.
Now, wait, what? Just back up. You've hit me with a lot of names and loud noises all at the same time. So give me this again?
Cody Rhodes is Mount Rushmore. Apparently, we don't know what this interview's from, allegedly, according to Jeremy. Mount Rushmore is Vince McMahon, Dusty Rhodes, The Rock, and Tony Khan. I mean, I guess...
He said that in public?
He said that, according to Jeremy, he said it in an interview, but in a sense, I could see maybe where he's coming from if it is a Cody Rhodes personal Mount Rushmore for his career.
Well, then I can understand Dusty. Then I can understand Vince. Tony Khan and what the and Tony Khan would probably say, "What, are you out of your mind? I'm on a Mount Rushmore of all the people in the history of the wrestling business."
No, he would embrace it. He would embrace it 100%.
All right, I don't know that. I don't know. What was Brandi's?
Brandi Rhodes is Mount Rushmore. Sherry Martel, Mae Young, Medusa, and Miss Elizabeth.
Do you think that there's any conceivable way that Brandi Rhodes ever even saw Mae Young before she was 80?
Do you think Brandi Rhodes has any idea of women's wrestling history and how to look at it in a historical context?
No. Along with men's wrestling, midget wrestling, bear wrestling, or alligator wrestling. But she picked 4 names that a person that might be doing an article on wrestling would say, okay, 4 famous women wrestling names. And that's the first 4 that pop up on the internet or whatever.
All right.
And Miss Elizabeth.
Miss Elizabeth.
Well, there was the great promo that Elizabeth... Oh, wait a minute. There was the great match that Elizabeth had. Oh, wait. There was the great angle that Elizabeth was centerpiece of. Oh, wait. There was... What did actually Elizabeth ever do but get married on television and walk to the ring with either Savage or Hulk at one point?
She was valuable as that valet walking with Savage to the ring as a heel or a babyface, but certainly no promos of any note. No matches. I mean, maybe a mixed match or two that I'm not thinking of, but nothing special. I know Sapphire wrestled. I don't remember if Elizabeth did.
All right.
But again, what the fuck does Brandi Rhodes know about anything? Especially if Cody's her coach on wrestling history. All right. Well,
and she should have put Moolah in there instead of May, but Moolah got heat a few years ago, so she had to drop that on the Google search.
That's right. Our next question sent to CornyDriveThru@gmail.com from Taylor in Charlotte, North Carolina. I recently saw a video on YouTube where Bret Hart buries George the Animal Steele in a shoot interview. Bret is quoted as saying, "He was a real motherfucker, not a good guy at all," and goes on to talk about how George fines him, Owen and the Berserker, $500 for being 2 minutes late. Bret claims George was snorting cocaine and partying with the boys, but turned into a power-hungry prick a couple weeks later when he became an agent. Bret said it was like a prisoner who became a guard. So my question is, do you have any experiences with George the Animal Steele, and do you agree with Bret Hart? And if so, why? And if not, why?
Well, I do have experience with George Steele, and I've worked with George Steele as an agent in the 90s. I guess, what was it? Would it have been 86 or 87 that Steele quit wrestling, had his last run, and became an agent? 88?
Yeah.
Okay. So that was 5 years before I ever met him. All I can say is I never saw George Steele snorting any cocaine. I found him to be intelligent, well-spoken. He was fun to ride in the car with. He was, fun to sit and talk and have a conversation with. He had a good understanding of the wrestling business. He knew that he had been a gimmick. He wasn't, the Luthez or the Bret Hart style of wrestler, but he was a gimmick, but he had respect for the gimmick. And, I never had an issue with him at all. And he wasn't the main event agent at that point in time. Pat Patterson would generally do that. Maybe Jack Lanza, if Pat wasn't around at a house show, would probably be doing the Shawn Michaels match or the title match or whatever. But George was important, both as an agent for the matches, and also back then the agents also did checkup work at the box office, and him and Hebner a lot of times would do that.
Which agent had the most heat when you were there?
Oh, God. Well, heat, different kinds of heat. Strongbow was an eye roller. It was like Strongbow, because everybody knew that Jay Strongbow was going to be over in the corner asleep somewhere, except if he was woken up and actually physically told to do a specific thing. And he was going to be over in the corner otherwise if he was awake, telling his stories about how, he was great and everybody else doesn't know what they're talking about. Everybody kind of rolled their eyes at him, but nobody hated him. And he really just dealt with underneath matches and or the job guys or whatever. And then he was gone at some point. Tony Gurria was a nice guy in some ways, but he was hard. He was very office and very official, and he would give the guys a hard time. If you weren't supposed to get a draw and you asked him for a draw, instead of saying, I wish I could, and I didn't ever get draws, so I'm not saying it's not a personal anecdote, but I've seen it. He'd say, well, we're not supposed to give draws. We can't give draws. Instead of saying, whatever. He was very, we wanted the job guys paid. Well, I don't have them on this list. Well, they're fucking standing here in front of you, Tony. And they just took the bump or did whatever. It was just, but again, people didn't hate him and want to get him fired. They're just like, fuck, I'd rather deal with fucking Hebner or Jack Lanza than Tony. I never had heat or vice versa with any of the agents because I thought they did a good job. I know that guys, depending on what their experience had been or, who was in charge of a match that they particularly didn't like, they, or whatever, or being on the road with guys on a regular basis, you get sideways with people. But I'm sorry, Bret Hart didn't like George Steele. I thought he was a nice man. I felt bad. He had health issues for quite a while there. And I'll go ahead and say this because I don't think it's a secret, but he had an operation and had a colostomy bag for some period of time, a few years. And then out of nowhere, I was already in Louisville and working in OVW. And I had talked to Bill Watts, and that's when Watts was on the kick where he was selling the vitamins and the supplements and the all natural nutrition and stuff. Yeah. And he was
gummy bears. Yeah. I remember.
Yeah. He was making a fortune on it too. Cause you can't I bought some, never took the shit, but you can't tell Bill Watts, no, I'm not buying what you're selling. That's just not possible in English. But I mentioned George Steele's problem to him, and he hadn't talked to George in ages, and he reached out to him 6 months later, whatever it was. If I'm lying, I'm flying. My feet ain't left the ground. George Steele called me and said, I just want to thank you. I said, what? He said, I talked to Bill Watts, and I said, what the hell? I've tried everything else. And he started taking Watts' stuff, and he had that colostomy reversed. And he said, if it hadn't been for you just mentioning my name on the phone with him, I got my life back. And that was cool. But he took the time out to call and say that. When it could have just stopped with Watts because all I did was say, hey, you ought to call George Steele. But anyway, I like George, never had a problem.
I remember Dennis did a show once, Dennis Carluzzo in North Jersey. I think it was a hotel in Totowa, New Jersey, mixed in with a convention. And that was the day the ring disappeared. And they had to get Frank Idavia's ring. And then Frank and his guys had to get it up in the elevator. And then it broke in the first match. Derek Domino took a bump right where the hole was and hurt his back. So he comes into the back, and the first thing he fucking says to the first person he sees, which is George the Animal Steele, he goes, oh man, don't take a bump in that ring. And George Steele goes, son, I haven't taken a bump in 20 years. That was a fucking highlight, something I got to witness. But
and George is smart because he was a school teacher. That's the whole gimmick when he started wrestling in Detroit for the Sheik in the 60s. He was the masked student because he was a school teacher and he was moonlighting. And then when he got the runs in the WWF for Vince Sr., he would do that in the summertime. He'd take 3 months off the school year and he'd go be George the Animal Steele in the WWF, work with Pedro Morales, whatever. And finally, it got to be where he was figured in enough with Vince and the business had changed to where he just said, fuck it, and quit teaching because he was, able to make so much money wrestling.
Well, Jim, perhaps if Bret Hart really had this big a problem, he should have looked into suing.
I'll tell you what, I think he should have, because after all, you got to put your money where your mouth is, or you got to put your lawyer where your mouth is. And in this case, I know of a person he could have retained that would have sued George Steele until he was back in a cage somewhere as an animal chewing on human bones.
Call Stephen P. News. If you need to sue. An outlaw mud show or two. Still to the rest.
Yes, folks, if you have a former school teacher that you would like to sue until they are a raving animal eating turnbuckles with a green tongue, look no further than newlawoffice.com, 888-692-8084. That is indeed the number of the legendary, infamous Stephen P. New, the man, the consigliere of the cult of Cornette, and the man who is taken the job on, taken the task on upon himself to oversee the legal rights and privileges of the entire cult of Cornette. Folks, if you have a legitimate gripe against somebody, then Stephen P. New can take that person to court and get you the compensation that you so rightfully deserve, whether you have been the victim of malfeasance, greed, and avarice by any major corporation that has poisoned you, prodded you, penetrated you, or in other ways made you sorry that you were around. Now you can make them sorry. Make them get down on their hands and knees and apologize by calling newlawoffice.com, 888-692-8084, laying your case out and letting Stephen P. New, the legal beagle, the king of torts, the barrister of champions, let him take it to the next level. Brian, how many people have you sued just in the last 3 months?
6.
6, 7, 8. I knew it was somewhere around there because Stephen P. New, he ought to have been born triplets. The man has such energy. He and Tony Khan, neither one ever sleep. Except Stephen does good work when he's awake.
All right. He certainly does.
Newlawoffice.com. 888-692-8084. Our longest running and most beloved sponsor here on the program. He's become an international celebrity, not only through his legal work, but also through the cult of Cornette spreading his name far and wide. There are people in the jungles of Zanzibar riding those black and white horses, zebras, that's what they are, that have heard of Stephen P. New and New Law Office.
That's right. And what an ending that was there to that spot.
Yes, and that was an abrupt stop.
Jim, let's get a couple more questions before we get a song or two and wrap things up. This one was sent to CornyDriveThru at gmail.com from Charlie in Starkville, Mississippi.
Oh, it took this long.
Jonathan Coachman recently said Vince McMahon didn't like the fact that he was bigger than him. He said Vince didn't like the backstage interviewers to be bigger guys because it made the talent look smaller. Was this one of Vince's pet peeves when you were with the company?
Well, no, he's just said two different things there. He said Vince McMahon didn't like it because I was bigger than him. And then he said Vince McMahon didn't like it when the backstage interviewer was bigger than the talent. And those are two different things. And I can tell you, yes, Vince was the same way when I was there. And so is pretty much almost every promoter that I've ever worked for, with, or been around is, no, you don't want your interviewer to be bigger than your talent. And I mean, maybe when Jules Strongbow was the matchmaker in Los Angeles, 6'6" and 350 pounds or whatever, he's standing there next to Nick Bockwinkel. Well, you couldn't do that much about that. He was the booker. But under normal circumstances, no, you don't want the interviewers, the announcers, the on-camera talent in that respect to be bigger than the wrestlers, unless it's, it's a guy and it's the girl wrestler, then that's somewhat natural. But as far as, I don't think, I mean, is Coachman trying to flatter himself by saying that he had a better physique than Vince McMahon? Because I think
that's not the way I read it. I think it was just size, just overall bulk.
Is he even bigger than Vince? Coachman.
I don't know.
He does. I mean, he may be tall. He came in after I left. I may have met him one time in all these years. He may be taller, but he ain't jacked up like Vince was. I don't think Vince would sweat Jonathan Coachman. Been on the cover of Muscle and Fitness at 72 years old or whatever. I think Vince would have a hard time being in the business he's in if he didn't want people bigger than him around him. But for a business reason, I understand and feel the same way, which is another reason why that's another triple whammy on Alex Marvez. He's not only the worst interviewer in the history of television, he's bigger than everybody on the fucking roster. That looks stupid.
Smoky Mountain, who did you have? Brian Matthews?
Brian Matthews.
That big ass head?
Well, yeah, I mean, Brian's head was larger than anybody. Well, no, we had several people do it over a period of time. Phil Rainey, the program director at Fox 43, was the first one because he had been Les Thatcher's partner in Southeastern Wrestling, and the fans in the area knew him. And, you know, he didn't do a real good job, but people knew him. But he could only do it in Knoxville. He wasn't going to travel to other cities. One time we got him to come to Johnson City because that's where we were shooting interviews. He came in, he's like, whoa, what a trip. So, okay. And we found Brian Matthews because his real line of work was for years he was a funeral director, a mortician. But he was on the radio on a very small station in Western Virginia. And he had a good voice. He had a large head, but he wasn't ridiculously tall. He was the same height as most of the guys, or if not shorter. He's my height. And he was a portly fellow, but he didn't look like he was any physical threat. And then we had Chip Kessler, who was a radio personality from the Tri-Cities. He was based out of Johnson City for years and years. And he was older and skinnier, and he was just a regular guy, and he did probably the best job of all of them on local promos. So, you know, yes, I wouldn't have had a guy that was ridiculously larger and as young or jacked up or built doing backstage interviews because the visual would be jarring.
Were there any interviewers or announcers while you were there that Vince really hated? Because I mean, so many people came and went while you were there. Were there any that really ticked off Vince?
Oh, God, I'm trying to... not the ones you would have thought. They loved to get the DJs involved, like Todd Pettingill and Sean Mooney. And Vince loved people who looked like they would be newscasters or people on other television programs, even if they didn't know jack shit about the wrestling business. Which is why that Michael Cole always got picked over Kevin Kelly. Kevin Kelly was an experienced wrestling announcer. He'd been a wrestling fan most of his life. He'd done local television in Florida. He comes in and immediately he's a great wrestling announcer, but he's portly and didn't have a lot of hair. And Michael Cole comes in, has never he's called a dog more recently than he's called a wrestling match. And they had to bring him from scratch, but because he had a legitimate news background, and had been I'm not knocking Michael Cole here. I never had a problem with Michael. I liked him, but he was not, especially at the start, nearly as good an announcer as Kevin Kelly was, but he had real television in his background. So Kevin Dunn chose him over Kevin Kelly for all the good assignments because he thought that he looked the part more of an announcer, but plus he didn't have to deal with Kevin being a wrestling fan and having wrestling background. They legitimately, even in those days, in the 90s, experience in wrestling counted against you with Kevin Dunn because he was trying to pull the wool over people's eyes every time that they hired somebody new. And they came in, Kevin Dunn or some of his minions in the studio would give the talk that this isn't wrestling and it's sports entertainment and we don't do wrestling, and lie to them. And the people with a wrestling background knew the difference and could see through that and knew that was just Kevin Dunn believed it, but that was just what Vince had people say. And the people who didn't have any wrestling background bought it because they didn't have any other frame of reference. So that's why they always picked for better assignments people with real television experience versus anybody that knew fuck all about wrestling. And yeah, so as far as announcers, Vince particularly didn't like. Was there anybody that was there for a week or two? Because that would, if he didn't particularly like anybody at all, they wouldn't be on the television to begin with.
You remember Stephanie Wyand?
Oh, good God, yes. And she was she with Todd Pettingill on one of those morning shows?
That's right. Well, on WWE TV. I don't know about anything outside of WWE.
No, one of the WWE morning show things that they tried on the weekends or whatever. I think that's what she was on, right? I don't know. Where did she come from? I worked there, and I'm asking you.
I have no idea.
Nobody else did either. There was a lot of people with no wrestling backgrounds. That was also, see, I got there right after the steroid business when they had put in the human resources department to be like a real company, and you had to talk to human resources about things, and they hired that Lisa Wolf, and they hired that Osbear D'Arce, and all these executives to work in the office that didn't come from wrestling backgrounds to prove that they were real companies. And they paid them a fortune, and they didn't do anything constructive. And they were usually a bother to everybody. And then after a couple of years, when the heat had died down, they all disappeared, thankfully.
Well, Jim, our final question.
Are we ready to disappear?
We have one last question here this week.
Well, I got one last answer.
This was sent to CornyDriveThru@gmail.com from Gorilla Ventura in Montreal. And he says he's sorry about the Mets. Thank you, Gorilla. I recently reread Ric Flair's autobiography and was surprised by a comment he made about Randy Savage. Flair seemed underwhelmed by Randy's match with Ricky Steamboat at WrestleMania 3 and stated of Savage, quote, "Because of his unwillingness to just get in the ring and improvise, I won't call him a great worker. I know Savage liked to plot things out, so I could see why Flair might not appreciate his approach, but saying Savage wasn't a great worker seems absurd to me. I always thought being a great worker meant making the match look real, and Savage's stuff always looked real to me, especially when compared to the rehearsed matches we see today. What do you make of what Flair wrote?"
Where can I go first? There's a difference between your work being good and being a good worker. And I'm not going to judge Rick's statement here just yet. I'm just going to try to delineate differences in people in wrestling when they say certain things a certain way. If your work looks good, then it looks real. You can't see through it. But at the same time, it's safe. If you're a good worker, that can be not only physical, but mental and psychological. Do you have good matches that bring the people on the fucking roller coaster ride? And
Jake.
Yeah, and he was a good worker, even though there was little in his matches, and he was the furthest thing from the best athlete, but mentally and psychologically, he was the good worker. So you understand there's different things. With Flair, talking about Savage, yes, Randy Savage was a good worker. His shit looked good, and the personality, he was real. We've talked about it many times. He was real, and his shit was good, and it wasn't dangerous or reckless or whatever. But at the same time, Randy Savage was never put in the position where he was going to go out and travel the world in a variety of promotions and have a 30-minute match for the world title every night against a different person, some of whom you might not have met, and there wasn't a lot of prep time. That's where Flair's going. He could step in the ring with anybody, whether he knew him or not, whether he'd ever met him or not, whether they even shook hands until they locked up in the ring, and he could go 30 minutes and it would be a world title match. It would be a main event. Savage in the WWF was in a different place where he was, he's working with Hogan some, and that wasn't going to be 30 minutes or fucking hard-hitting or impromptu. But he also could work with the other guys like Steamboat, etc. when he wanted to. But where a lot of this comes from, maybe the majority of the ill feeling comes from, and it's hard to explain again today, but people have talked about it. Steamboat's talked about it. Savage knew that he and Steamboat had a chance to steal the show at WrestleMania 3, at least in terms of in the ring, even if they weren't going to have the big payoff like Andre and Hulk, even if they weren't going to be the main event, they could be what people remembered. And Savage sat down in his mind and worked out a match and wrote it down and gave it to Steamboat, and they studied it and quizzed themselves on it and went out and did it. And one of the reasons they did that was because how long did that match go? And it was long for WWF standards at that time, but was bell to bell, could it have been more than 15 minutes? Because nobody in those days got the chance, like in the NWA, like in Crockett, to go out and have a classic 30-minute world title match like Flair and Steamboat, whatever, or Flair and Wyndham, or et cetera. So Savage knew that he might have been able to call that whole match off the top of his head in the ring, but it would have taken longer because there would have had to have been times where you're down, you're in a headlock, calling something or planning your next strategy. But if they knew it ahead of time, they could go boom, boom, boom. And that's one of the reasons for the pace, because I think Steamboat, when he did the interview, said they had some ridiculous amount of false finishes, like 40 or whatever. And they remembered them all, and it boom, boom, boom. But this is what I was saying, as far as people today may be, what in the world are you talking about? To write down your match ahead of time, to work it out in the locker room and already know what you were going to do before you went to the ring, was probably not only a huge insult to anyone who considered themselves a great worker, but also just mind-blowing to any veteran of wrestling at the time that such a thing would take place. And I think that Flair wrote Savage off specific, because they had never been in the same place when that Steamboat Savage match happened. I doubt they'd ever met each other. They'd never been in the same promotion. He probably wrote him off right there, and not knowing his background, not knowing what else Savage had to offer, what else was going on, just thought this fucking guy wrote his match down and planned it ahead of time, and they went out and did it according to notes. Fuck that. And honestly, I can't, blame that attitude at that time. That was just ridiculously unheard of. So that may have been what colored Flair's impression from then on of Randy Savage.
When did that start? I mean, he never did that with Lawler, did he?
No, are you?
I know, that's what I'm saying. You're
fucking kidding? When Lawler was the booker, I've been in matches where my heels were wrestling Lawler, and 10 minutes in the match, he was still trying to decide on what he wanted the finish to be. You couldn't get Lawler to fucking quit playing cards before his main event, where he'd sold out the Coliseum long enough to barely get the finish. And he said, I'll figure it out. And they always did. Everything with Lawler was impromptu. No, that started there. Savage Steamboat 3, or WrestleMania 3, Savage Steamboat was, maybe some outlaw guys had done it somewhere. Every once in a while, when I'd done the finish for the Midnight Express, I had something jotted down on a fucking Wendy's receipt in my shorthand just to remind myself of what I'd thought of in the back seat. But I remember hearing at the time that guys were talking when that happened, saying, yeah, they planned that match out. And everybody's like, what? So I don't know that on a mainstream big level promotion that had ever happened before like that. Maybe, if there was a situation where there was a celebrity or some pro football player or some big freak giant, somebody from outside the business, and they say, okay, this has got to be short and it's got to be exact and we can't let people see through this, then they had done something like that. But amongst two main event guys, I'd never heard of it before.
And of course, that influenced Dallas Page from when he worked with Randy Savage. He started scripting out all of his matches, and that did not go over with, let's say, The Undertaker when he handed him a script.
Yeah, because you got to, now it's it's Paige coming from WCW to the WWF. It's not Randy Savage, for the previous 3 years, one of the top fucking guys in the company. It's a guy coming from the opposition and handing the icon of the new company a fucking, I don't even think they were, Paige would have been bizarre enough to call it a script. That word was banned in wrestling until it was taken over by outsiders. You never heard anybody use the word script. But just the idea that he would hand him notes on I came up with a match for us. Undertaker, what the fuck? Seriously? And I mean, even then in the 90s, you might go over it verbally if it's pay-per-view and your time is limited or big time TV or whatever. You go over it verbally, but to write it down and, et cetera, that was still very odd then. Now people, are like, well, why wouldn't you do that? Because it went against everything that the wrestling business was. So you had to get all the people out of the wrestling business that cared about what the wrestling business was before that could be a widespread procedure.
All right. Well, on that 94, the drive-thru has closed. That's pretty good today.
Last call.
All right. We're ending on a happy note. Of course, you can hear the drive-thru when it debuts next week, wherever you find your favorite podcast, and the experience this weekend, also wherever you find your favorite podcasts.
Yes. And we're going to be laughing at NXT, passing judgment on AEW, talking about the dark side of the ring this Thursday night on Vice, about Johnny K9 / Bruiser Bedlam, which will be enlightening for us all. And
hey, you're on that one. You're on that one too. Don't forget that.
I'm on that. So it's going to be a wonderful program. And also right after that is the MLW Fightland special. And we're going to watch Fatu versus Hammerstone to get some WWE or AEW blood in here and see what they're doing. So that's going to be on this week's experience, along with the usual jocularity and joviality.
For that Hammerstone Fatu match, who do you think is going to be more stoned in the ring? Here's the answer, Fatu! But anyway.
I don't think it would be possible for anyone else to be
right. That's right. We'll talk more about that next week or later this week on The Experience. Of course, you can subscribe to the official Jim Cornette YouTube channel. Just go to YouTube and search for Jim Cornette for full episodes, clips of episodes, omnibus collections, all available for you to share and post wherever you want. Of course, the incredible archive of amazing Travis Heckel artwork. We've had some amazing guest artists sitting in for the last week plus. Check it all out today. Subscribe today. Over 250,000 strong and growing each and every day. The official Jim Cornette YouTube channel. Get access to classic episodes of The Drive-Thru and The Experience on Patreon, patreon.com/Cornette. For only $5 a month, you get access to the archive of The Drive-Thru and The Experience from the beginning in 2013. Patreon.com/Cornette. You can follow Jim on Twitter at @TheJimCornette. You can follow me on Twitter at GreatBrianLast. You can hear me on the 605 Superpodcast at 605pod.com, available wherever you find your favorite podcasts. Don't forget about, or maybe soon forget about, Cornette's Collectibles at jimcornette.com. I never know what to say for this plug.
Well, I tell you what, by the time you hear this, we may have suspended sales again, but only because of the outpouring, the plethora of folks that have purchased over the last few days, and I don't want to be a prick. I got to get that stuff out, but if it's still up, JimCornette.com will be up no matter what. But if the store is still open and things are still on sale and you want something and you hear my voice now, get it quick because it ain't going to stay too long. And then apparently I'm going to have to farm Hotchkiss out to fix the problem because since we've been recording, Facebook is off the air.
Well, you bring up since we've been recording, since that whistleblower was on 60 Minutes last night, Facebook has been off the air.
Well, I'm just saying, it says on the news here, it is normal for websites and apps to suffer outages. I can testify to that. Though one on a global scale is very rare.
Well, we'll see what you can do about that. We'll see what you can do about that next week.
I'm gonna send Hotchkiss to go fix Facebook.
Of course, if you have any problems with your websites or anything else, don't forget the Drive-Thru is brought to you by the Law Office of Stephen P. New, 692-8084. Get even with Steven at newlawoffice.com. But until this weekend on The Experience, and next week right back here on the Drive Thru, for Jim Cornette, I'm the great Brian Last. Tally-ho!